Coming up on Bloomberg this weekend, President Trump threatens to hit Iran with 1,000 missiles if he's targeted for assassination, as the U.S. demands that Iran tell the world the Strait of Hormuz is open.
Plus, more than 20 U.S. warships patrolling in the Middle East. We sit down with America's highest-ranking naval officer, asking about the strain on sailors and equipment.
But at the end of the day, the greatest compliment we can get as a Navy is to be needed and to be utilized.
And Apple sues OpenAI, the artificial intelligence company accused of poaching workers and stealing company secrets.
Meanwhile, shares of the chipmaker SK Hynix rose 13% in their Wall Street debut. The company's chairman talks to Bloomberg about the largest public listing by a foreign company in the U.S. ever.
We've been waiting for that for a long, long time.
Welcome to the weekend. It is Bloomberg This Weekend. We are coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York. I'm Christina Ruffini.
And I'm David Gura with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, July the 11th. Welcome to our listeners and viewers all across our Bloomberg platforms, on radio, on television, streaming, on Bloomberg.com, and on the Bloomberg Business app. Our focus this morning on the Middle East. So is the president's focus, it seems, this morning. Indications that there were designs on assassinating the president by Iran, the president reacting to that on Truth Social overnight.
Right, and saying still willing to negotiate on a technical level, not clear who is doing those negotiations. Qataris are involved going as envoys to kind of mediate once again. But the other thing is there's a lot of talk about the ceasefire breaking down. And as I was saying yesterday, they kept using that word ceasefire. I don't think it means what they think it means, because it never really was a ceasefire. And that's one of the things we're going to pick apart this morning, as well as the status of where that conflict is and what is really going on in the Gulf.
Yes, a peculiar, tenuous ceasefire. And we have a lot of ballistic bluster from the president this morning saying he would strike Iran with 1,000 missiles if there were an attempt on
ballistic
on
bluster?
His life.
That was nice alliteration there.
Happy Saturday, everybody. Lisa Mateo has the headlines. Lisa, take it away.
You got it. And let's pick it up from there. President Trump has been the target of several assassination attempts. Now, during the 2024 presidential election, Trump was briefed by the Biden administration officials regarding, quote, real and specific threats from Iran to kill him. Now, on his way back from the NATO summit in Turkey earlier this week, the president switched Air Force One planes at a British military base. Now, at the time, Trump denied that the decision was prompted by a security concern. The president's stern threat to Iran, well, it comes at the end of a week where clashes between Tehran and the U.S. will seem to squash any hopes that the tentative accord reached between the two countries will hold. Meanwhile, the U.S. demanding that Iran issue a public statement that all channels of the Strait of Hormuz are open to shipping and that they will not attack transiting civilian vessels. Senior administrative officials, they say failure to do so, well, that would result in consequences. To the war in Ukraine, where Ukraine's state emergency service says at least 10 people, including a child, were injured after Russia launched an overnight missile and drone attack on Kyiv. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched 10 missiles and more than 120 drones against Ukraine. The Mexican builder fatally shot by an ICE officer in Houston is being mourned. And now the three men who survived the shooting, well, they say no officer was threatened. A lawyer for the men, they say an officer shot and killed Lorenzo Salgado Araujo through the passenger side window during an attempted traffic stop earlier this week. The Department of Homeland Security claims Araujo, he rammed into an ICE vehicle. The officers were not wearing body cameras. President Trump's supporters are. Tom Homan said they have to wait for the investigation to play out.
Because who knows, is there body cam footage? Is there cell phone videos? Like what happened in Minnesota, there was actually a city camera captured something. So let the investigation play out. If the officers acted outside policy or illegally, they'll be held accountable.
To Maine now, where Democrats continue to scramble to find a last-minute replacement for Grant Platner after he officially withdrew from the race for a U.S. Senate seat following allegations of sexual assault. The party announced it will hold a nominating convention on July 25th, where more than 600 delegates will vote on a replacement nominee. And Apple suing OpenAI for trade secret theft. It accuses the AI startup of a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. OpenAI denies those claims. And David, Christina, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow going to be joining us a little bit later to
get his
dig
thoughts
more
on
in.
this. Yeah, and a fierce fight for talent out in Silicon Valley, especially in the AI space. Lisa, thank you very much.
Thanks,
Joining
Lisa.
us now to talk more about the overnight developments out of Iran is Bloomberg News Middle East reporter Dan Williams. Dan, always good to have you with us, and I return to that ballistic bluster. I can't resist using the term once again. The headline, of course, is President Trump says the ceasefire is over, but talks continue. And then we have him sending this missive last night. 1,000 missiles are locked and loaded and aimed at the Islamic Republic of Iran, with thousands of more immediately to follow should the Iranian government act on its threat, pronounced in many corners of the globe, to assassinate or attempt to assassinate the sitting president of the United States of America, in this case, me. A lot of clauses there, which made that very difficult for me to read on this Saturday. But Dan,
you did a great job, buddy.
Set the scene for us. These talks are continuing. The president says he's fine with that happening. His emissaries are in the Middle East with a mind toward talking with the Iranians. Yet the backdrop doesn't seem very conducive to much progress. How do you read it?
Well, I think this is largely about Hormuz, and I think it's largely about Trump being very personally upset, miffed, at the open displays of defiance and hostility toward him that we saw in that week-long funeral for the slain supreme leader of Iran, huge banners in English threatening bluntly the killing of the US president. Now, to be fair, he's no stranger, or the Iranians are no stranger to receiving such rhetoric from him. We'll remember just a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, talk about effectively ending the Iranian civilization if they don't comply with US demands. That was just one of the selection that we had on the smorgasbord of Trump's ballistic bluster, as you put it. But now he's taking it personally. It's worth remembering, well before this war, I believe there were two assassination attempts uncovered by US authorities that were attributed to Iran. There is that long-standing state of official hostility between the countries well before the war, well before the Trump administration. So that shouldn't be surprised. I think what he wanted, what the US administration wanted out of this MOU, which we in the press tend to refer to as an interim peace deal in shorthand, was a week-long reprieve for that funeral, leading to, and obviously the opening of the Strait of Hormuz mutually by the Iranians and by the US, leading to a sequencing of diplomatic talks resolving the differences. What you had instead was very full-throated, angry, vengeful rhetoric from Tehran, a very well-attended funeral, which I think drove home to Trump, to his administration, frankly, to anyone watching, that the Iranians remain defiant. This really isn't a peace deal, at least on US terms. And indeed, in some terms, it could be said the Iranians came out triumphant from this war where they faced down the US, the world superpower, along with the greatest, or the most powerful regional military power, that's Israel.
Although there was one very prominent face missing from that funeral, and that was the new supreme leader, Khamenei. No word yet on where he is, on his health, on the state of him. He has not been seen since all this happened. We talked about how there are these technical talks happening probably in Oman over the weekend. The U.S. wants Iran to publicly state that the Strait of Hormuz is open and say it's going to stop firing on commercial ships. CBS is reporting that Iranian officials privately told the White House it was a mistake. They shouldn't have fired on those ships this past week, and it was a bit of a command and control issue. And that makes me wonder who really is in charge in Tehran right now. At some point, is there a concern that could start to fracture between more hardline groups and whatever leadership is left from the last regime? And where do you go from here? Is the Strait open? Is the Strait ever going to be open again? At this point, it seems like an existential question.
I would agree, and I think that is the bare minimum that the United States wants to get from this MOU. If the US is to walk away from this crisis with Iran effectively in control of Hormuz, I think it'll be undeniable that Iran gained a major strategic achievement out of this war launched against it by the US and Israel. So I think that was the main aim of the MOU, to sort out the Hormuz issue, to allow an eventual US drawdown, albeit with pressure down the line to touch on other issues in Iran, for example, its nuclear program, its support for proxies. But really, Hormuz was most pressing. It affects world commerce, it affects US allies in the Gulf, and it affects the prestige of the United States in the Middle East, given that very significant shift of ownership or control in that strategic waterway. Will it open? I can't answer. The question about authorship or leadership in Iran really is a black box to outside observers. They've exercised extraordinarily good message control, largely by shutting down the internet throughout the course of this crisis. Just 6 months ago, they brutally shut down a nationwide wave of uprisings, something of a mini insurgency, which they managed to put down. They face pretty open threats from their enemies to stir up such opposition topple the regime. They're not going to allow to happen if anyone's going to ask them. So what you have here is a leadership which did manage to sign this MOU just 4 weeks ago. There was no problem then in authorship for that MOU. So for us now to try to dismiss lethal fire being applied to ships as some sort of breakdown in communication, breakdown in command and control, where only 4 weeks ago there was enough command and control for them to sign an MOU that everyone hailed as a binding interim peace deal, I'm not sure that holds much water.
All right, Dan Williams, thank you so much, our Middle East reporter. Nice to see you back in your garden. Hopefully that those citrus fruits will be coming in soon. All right, to talk more about the flow of oil, or lack thereof, out and through the Strait of Hormuz, we're joined by Clara Gillispie. She's a senior fellow for climate and energy at the Council on Foreign Relations. Clara, thank you for joining us. You have a new piece out titled "Not So Straightforward: Hormuz, Iran, and the Future of Gulf Oil, and gas flows." And you talk about both the good and bad views, optimism and pessimism of how and when oil supplies could return to some sort of normal. Can you walk us through the main arguments there?
Absolutely. And just to give you a sense of what that spectrum is, we've seen a range of analyses and predictions that say everything between we could expect if the recovery continues to move forward, if the Strait does remain open to an extent, even if it's a complicated reopening, maybe starting to see a renormalization, a major recovery of Gulf energy flows by the end of the year, going into next year. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you get all the way to we should never expect to see a full recovery. Or even if we see a recovery in production levels, it's not necessarily going to look out like what we saw pre-February of this year. And there are a number of reasons for that range of projections. I think both extremes of this debate kind of broadly agree that there are 4 key tasks that need to be done for the reopening and for the restabilization, renormalization of flows in particular. That's the clearing of ships in the Gulf. It's the bringing back in of new empty tankers that can help to offload cargoes from producers. It's the restart of production itself out of a number of economies that halted their operations during this conflict. And then it's also a matter of dealing with the significant multi-billion-dollar damage that we've seen across the region, not just to oil refineries and LNG facilities, but also ports that are going to continue to shape the output level.
Clara, let me ask you just about the overarching ambiguity that still exists in this part of the world. So we quoted from the president just a few minutes ago his threat to bomb Iran again and more significantly. He never tried to take Karg Island. He could destroy more energy infrastructure in Saudi Arabia in Iran and elsewhere. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are still reeling from what's happened. As you look at things now, sort of how stable are things? As we talk about the prospect of kind of reopening that strait, are we at a point where that's really where the conversation lies, or is there still kind of an overarching anxiety about sort of what more could happen to the infrastructure that's already been hit and hurt?
It's absolutely a situation that remains incredibly fragile, and I think unstable is also the really apt word in this space. I think earlier this week when President Trump said, the ceasefire is over, and we saw renewed strikes from both the United States and Iran, one of the questions that those of us who followed energy markets had was, is this a situation where we're going back to where we've been for the last few months? Or, is this just another risk that markets are going to an extent, be willing to price in? And I think it is still early days for multiple reasons. But one of the things that we have seen, even as of this week, is that while traffic shipments in and out of the Strait have been significantly below pre-war levels, you do see a number that have at least attempted the crossing, not just exiting the Strait, but to a more minor extent, some that are continuing to go back in as well. How they're getting to that confidence of doing this, how long they will be willing to continue to brave that risk, these are the things we don't really have good answers to at the moment.
And there seem to be several ways in which they're doing this, and it's a little hard to track literally because sometimes they are doing it in a clandestine manner, turning off those trackers, doing it in the middle of the night so that they can get those ships out. You referenced this a little bit with David's question, but we had Qatar's big LNG plant that was hit. They were ramping up, planning to restart production this week, and then they put that back on hold after an LNG tanker was fired on by Iranian forces in the Gulf. We've talked a lot throughout this process about risk and how much risk these countries and companies are going to be willing to take and what that's going to cost. What's your analysis of that with those scenarios that you laid out?
I mean, so what this cost is still a number that we're continuing to revise upwards, right? Because we're still continuing to see damage to new vessels, damage to infrastructure, as well as additional questions about what it looks like to recover well from the scenario. So Qatar and others are not just looking at repairing their facilities, but they're also looking at scenarios for hardening them as well. Scenarios for, in the case of others as well, looking at alternate routes to exit. To give you one number I've seen on this, just in terms of the repair costs, we are talking somewhere on the order of $60 billion. It's an incredible amount of money. That says nothing about the impact that this has also had on human lives, daily society, other elements of the economy as well. But it is something that, rather than just walking away from this very expensive element, it's something that doing this repairs is also seen as an important part about how you think about societal recovery, how you think about the restoring of contributions to GDP and other things. So it's an unenviable situation.
Clara, we've got about a minute left, and I want to ask you about what David Sanger brought up in the Times this week, and that is this change from the U.S. administration using carrots to using sticks. And we saw that with the General License X1 that the administration put in place here, lifting the waiver that they'd had, allowing Iran to sell oil on the open market. Again, in the minute we have left, can you explain the ramifications of that, sort of how that colors these negotiations as they continue to unfold?
Oh, God. I mean, it's very much a live question. And in terms of how it colors the negotiations, it's genuinely hard to even say where those things are at. Yes, the United States has been using more sticks than carrots, but it's also a question of how effectively we can even use those sticks to make some of the demands that President Trump and others have had in terms of our ability to compel Iran to reopen the Strait, compel Iran to address the questions about mining still through the Maine navigation areas, questions even about the routes that ships can be guaranteed to take, and also if those routes will be open with the additional fee or other things. Yeah. So
stand by.
Everything's on the table right now.
Clara, a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you very much. It's Clara Gillispie. She's a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Appreciate the time on this Saturday.
All right, coming up, Apple takes OpenAI to court as SK Hynix debut could mark an end to the AI boom and bust cycle. Bloomberg Tech host Ed Ludlow is here. He's going to break it all down. That is straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend. Stick with us. We will be right back on all the platforms.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. President Donald Trump will let the bipartisan housing bill approved by Congress become law without his signature. The president refused to put his name on it because of the little progress made in passing a strict voter ID bill that he's been pushing. Trump had 10 days until Friday deadline to sign the bill, issue a veto, or allow the measure to take effect without his signature. The governor of Missouri has declared a state of emergency after widespread flooding and heavy rainfall in the state. Dozens of people were rescued, including several campers who took shelter on the roof of a building that collapsed. The Reynolds County Sheriff's Office said emergency responders had more than 90 water rescues of campers and people in cars after several inches of rain fell across central and eastern Missouri through Friday morning. And a deadly wildfire in southern Spain has killed at least 12 people. The blaze started late Thursday in the Almeria province. Now, it's one of Spain's deadliest wildfires. 8 people have been injured. More than 20 are still missing. And a large and powerful typhoon moving toward China, bringing heavy rain and strong winds ahead of its expected landfall. Typhoon Bobby, it's disrupted air travel in the region, triggered an emergency response in the Zhejiang province. Now it's the 9th typhoon of the year. David and Christina, over to you.
Scary stuff. Thanks, Lisa. All right, Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft, accusing the artificial intelligence startup and its hardware chief of engaging in a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. The tech giant accused the AI startup of encouraging Apple employees to share information related to upcoming products and named the chief hardware officer in the suit.
OpenAI is denying the allegations in a statement, writing, quote, "We have no interest in other companies' trade secrets. We remain focused on building innovative technology that empowers people everywhere." Ed Ludlow, host of Bloomberg Tech, joins us now here in New York for more on the two giants' relationship souring. This is kind of a window into what you've talked so much about, this war for talent in Silicon Valley right now, centering on AI.
Yeah.
Christina mentioning those names, Tang Tan, Johnny Ive, legends kind of Apple's hardware operation, have been brought over to OpenAI to work on new products there. What does this story say about that broader fight that's taking place?
Well, I mean, this is a big story, and I would say probably actually as much about Silicon Valley's look to the future of hardware as much as it is the people. You know, if you think about the landscape of Apple and Meta as examples, trying to work out how people, consumers, use AI through different device form factors. The smartphone is what we mostly use, but glasses are coming in. People have tried pins. That's kind of the underlying layer of the story, which is interesting. But in terms of Apple versus OpenAI, the sort of full economic and litigating might of Apple against OpenAI, it's very serious.
You just referenced it, but what does this mean for OpenAI when it comes to trying to expand into hardware and when it comes to actually making money from people using AI, which is a bit of a
yeah. I mean, in the suit, Apple describes OpenAI's hardware effort as nascent, but you gave the key details, which is that Apple claims there are about 400 Apple alumni now working at OpenAI, and the specifics of which OpenAI executives coached those hires, as the suit alleges, on how to sort of leave Apple smoothly with, as the suit alleges, documents, etc. We don't know much about the form factor or where OpenAI is at with its device progress, but the backstory is very much bigger than that. A couple of years ago, the company started working together on software for the iPhone, integrating OpenAI's AI technology into Siri. Then Johnny Ive struck up a relationship with Apple and with OpenAI, sorry, and it's kind of soured from there. The net result, well, we don't know.
Yeah, there's kind of a with friends like you who needs friends quality to all of this. But what is the status of the kind of business relationship or partnership between these two companies today?
Well, I mean, now Apple wants to go to trial with a jury trial.
Fair enough.
Right? And, it's worth pointing out that, well, what is it that Apple wants to achieve through this suit? They want OpenAI to stop what they're alleging they're doing, which is misuse of trade secrets. But more than that, the suit requests that OpenAI start again, re-engineer any hardware that Apple believes has their own technology in it. But basically, it has been souring, I think is the phrase you used, David. That's right, and it's probably kind. There was a middle ground or a middle stop between Apple's developer conference 2 years ago, where Sam Altman was there, and Apple executives were calling OpenAI the leader in the field, and they started this work on the software side, to OpenAI being very frustrated with Apple because they felt that Apple wasn't moving on the things that initial agreement had put in place. I want to point out one piece of reporting that is important. Apple had made an attempt to get OpenAI to change this behavior outside of court and basically cease and desist. And clearly that was some months ago and that didn't work. So now we await next steps, but that's what Apple wants.
But it's so interesting to me because this is, it solidifies kind of the environment in Silicon Valley, right? But this is nothing new. Like you can think back to like GE competitors doing this, and any big successful company, I feel like this always happens. You're the trendsetter, you're the gold standard, and then people defect and start their own things, or they poach from there because that's where it started. Like, what is the threshold for what they have to prove here?
Well,
Do they have to prove that they've actually stolen documents? They have to prove, okay.
It is very common for talented people to go from one Silicon Valley technology company to another.
Right.
So long as they are acting within the confines of the law. And, Apple speaks to this in the suit. They basically accuse OpenAI of coaching these people to avoid the dreaded walkout. So when you give your notice, everyone wants that 2-week period where you stay in post and not get walked off the premises. But as a part of that, Apple's allegation is that OpenAI encouraged those hires from Apple to use the window to access documentation, specifically, though, about unreleased products and non-disclosed technology at Apple. That's the underlying point here.
Let me make what I hope will be an elegant segue here.
Please.
So you're talking about the adventures these companies are embarking on in new hardware related to AI, and you're here in New York because you sat down with the chairman of the SK Group.
Yes.
Within that organization, there's SK Hynix, which makes these memory chips. Crucially important as we look at kind of where AI is going and where AI-related hardware is going as well. So you sat down with the chairman of that company yesterday. What did he say about the prospects for that company in this field? What's it going to mean for the production of chips broadly, for memory chips in particular going forward as we see this expansion?
Yeah, this was the biggest US first-time share sale by a foreign company. So they have their own shares in Korea, common shares that are listed in Seoul, and now they have American depository receipts. One ADR represents 1/10 of one Korean share, but it set records. They raised money for a reason. They need to build more capacity for memory chips that go into consumer electronics, like Apple makes with the iPhone, but more critically in the AI age, high bandwidth memory, which is lots of layers of DRAM memory into data centers. And the biggest takeaway for me from that is, despite their best efforts and being on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars, they say their supply may never catch up with the growing demand.
That's crazy to me. The company's been talking about how it's kind of cyclical demand, which also was confusing to me because I feel like, well, that's what I mean. Like right now, it seems like there is just demand.
So historically, memory chips are boom and bust. When there is great demand for consumer electronics, the memory chip companies ramp up capacity, and people tend to have stockpiles. Then when consumer electronics demand falls away because of an economic cycle or it's just not in vogue, sometimes those memory chip makers have been, oh no, now what do we do with all these big factories we've built and no one wants any memory chips? So they've tried to avoid that. Is the AI era different where the data center demand for memory is sort of more linear and keeps going? And they would say, yes, it is.
A fascinating moment when he brought up the concept of memory as a service. So we think of memory as a commodity of these chips, and you teased a bit out of him in that regard. Later on, I was filling in for Ed on the show yesterday on Bloomberg Tech yesterday.
Thank you.
Talked to Professor you. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, you two. Do I need to be here for this?
At UCLA, who's really pioneered memory work. He said this is the next frontier. Explain what it is and sort of how that stands to change the way that we think about the compute that goes into AI.
Honestly, I don't know. He kind of did it of his own volition. But, in the world of AI, when you think about AI workloads, so not training AI models, but running them, inference, you don't sort of necessarily as an everyday consumer or even a software company, any company that's using AI say, okay, I better go out and buy myself lots of chips to run this AI stuff. You rent cloud computing capacity from Amazon or Microsoft, Google, etc. And I think what he was basically saying is, instead of us selling the memory chips, kind of avoiding that boom and bust cycle, why don't we just rent out the memory capacity? Now, I think there's a lot of questions about how that would work in practice. And, I tried to say to him, how would that work in practice? It's been really interesting because the Korean press has really picked this up and run with it. It's an interesting idea, potentially higher margin. We don't know, but, that is the direction that computing is going in, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
And we also have some sound from your interview because the chairman said he had big plans for the U.S. So.
Yes.
The SK already invested more than $35 billion in U.S. side. My plan is that a much bigger number. So
bigger than 35 billion.
much bigger than 35.
So much bigger than 35 billion.
Much.
What is he teeing up?
Yeah, I right now, again, SK, they have 60% market share, basically, in high bandwidth memory, these data center memory chips we've been talking about. In Korea, they've committed hundreds of billions of US dollars to expand their domestic capacity, Here in the US, across SK Group, to date, 35 billion. So they raised $26.5 billion selling US listed shares. Kind of seems like nothing in the grand scheme of things. But this is where the customers are, right? NVIDIA is the biggest driver of HBM adoption. For every one NVIDIA GPU, there are 8 corresponding HBM chips. So if NVIDIA is going up like that, it's logical that so would SK. So they know that's a part of it. They need to have capacity here to serve the data center build out in the United States. He just didn't give me a dollar figure. Imagine if he had.
Yeah.
We sent a red headline on the Bloomberg terminal with that because it's a very important political thing as well, right? This nation And this administration has been very proactive in getting outside capital to commit to building things here in America.
Got about a minute left. So
Sure.
you say that they have the largest share of high bandwidth memory production. There's Micron, there's Samsung as well. We had Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, talking about his desire for Samsung, SK Hynix, to do more here in the U.S. How resonant is that? And when you listen to him, you asked about politics explicitly, his relationship with the Trump administration. What's your read on kind of the resonance of calls like that from the Trump administration to do more here in the U.S. with a company like SK Hynix?
Yeah, and if you expand it beyond memory, TSMC as well. You know, the world is highly dependent on Taiwan for the production of the latest chips on the logic side, GPUs, compute. That is a security risk, many would say. So there's a great willingness to invest in America. The president been a good deal maker, but the debate that exists is, would they ever, Samsung, TSMC, bring their latest and greatest to America prior to bringing it to Korea or Taiwan? That seems unlikely. So you're waiting for the great American champion to crack the technology side. But that is the direction of travel.
Ed, we've only got about 30 seconds left before we have to send you on your way back home. What other stories should we be watching on your beat? What are you looking at coming up?
Earnings, technology company earnings, and all the American public needs to know this weekend is how much money did they spend on AI, and now how much money comes out the other side? Like, what's the net result of all of this spending? This quarter seems like that will be more in focus.
Awesome. Ed Ludlow, it's so nice to
Great
see you.
Nice to see you.
Your inaugural couch segment.
Thank you.
It was good.
Glad to have
Very
you
comfortable.
Please come back.
Of course, the host of Bloomberg Tech. Coming up here, the scramble is on for Maine Democrats after Graham Platner calls it quits. We're going to dig into that story next with our Boston bureau chief, Brooke Sutherland. It's coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, on Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. Delta Airlines reaffirmed its full-year profit guidance, citing strong demand for premium corporate and international travel. Now, the airline's revenue rose 14% from a year earlier, but its adjusted fuel expense, that was up 77% from a year ago period. And that means, yes, ticket prices will likely remain higher. On an analyst call, CEO Ed Bastian said it's not just fuel costs that are up.
The cost for labor is up. The cost for airports are up. The cost for technology is up. Planes you can't get, and if you can get them, their costs are higher.
Well, to sports now. The PGA Tour continues with the Genesis Scottish Open at the Renaissance Club. Topping the leaderboard is a three-way tie for first between Jordan Smith, Tom Kim, and Rory McIlroy at 9 under par, followed by Matt Fitzpatrick at 8 under par. At Wimbledon, Jannik Sinner defeated Novak Djokovic and Alexander Zverev. They topped Arthur Ferry, setting the stage for the men's final tomorrow. Today, we have a pair of Czech stars. They're going to square off in the women's final. We have Karolina Muchova battles Linda Noskova. In World Cup quarterfinals action, Spain defeated Belgium 2-1 in Los Angeles yesterday. Spain will now advance to play France on Tuesday in Dallas, and that means there are now 2 semifinal spots left. Let's get to it. Today, Norway battles England at Miami Stadium, and Argentina takes on Switzerland at Kansas City Stadium. A lot of action going on.
A lot of action.
Good. It's fun.
One game
it's
at 9 o'clock Eastern time. I will not be watching.
No.
But I will try to watch the afternoon game. You?
All right.
Maybe?
No.
All right, for the
She's
finals.
honest.
I like that, unequivocal in her response. Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Maine Democrats are rushing to find a replacement in a crucial Senate race after Graham Platner formally withdrew his candidacy following a sexual assault allegation that caused his support from fellow Democrats to collapse. Platner, in a post on X, announced his official withdrawal from the Senate race, saying, quote, "My name may have been on the ballot, but that ballot line belongs to the people of Maine. As such, please consider this notice as my official withdrawal from consideration from this office."
All right, Maine Democrats now have until July 27th to pick a replacement for Platner. Joining us now to talk about next steps ahead of this crucial Senate race is Bloomberg's Boston bureau chief, Brooke Sutherland. Brooke, thank you so much for coming to join us. I do want to ask, it seems like some of these things should have been, or frankly were, discoverable before they decided to run him as a candidate. I want to play you some sound from some campaign advisors who spoke to the Wall Street Journal.
Did the vetting process turn up the tattoo that became so controversial? No.
The Reddit posts, did that turn up in the vetting process?
The firm sent us a thing, and it had some of the posts, but it didn't have all of them.
And what did you think about that? How did you think your way through the fact that he had posted these things on social media?
I said none of this will or should stop him from becoming a U.S. senator.
So that was Platner strategist Daniel Moraff saying, they hired a firm to vet the candidate as they do. And it seems like after that excruciatingly long pause, some of this stuff was known. Is it clear what they knew, what they didn't know, and why they decided to make the decision to go ahead and put him forward as a candidate?
I think all of those details are still coming to light, but certainly a lot of frustration on the part of Democrats. I mean, I think what's important to remember here is just how crucial this race is. Its import carries well beyond Maine. Democrats need a net gain of 4 seats in order to retake the Senate. Susan Collins was widely considered the most vulnerable incumbent because President Donald Trump lost Maine in 2024. Kamala Harris won the state by 7 points. There's a lot of anti-Trump sentiment in the state of Maine. This seemed to be one that was reachable in reach. And instead, you're seeing this sort of last minute scramble to come up with somebody who does not have all of this baggage. And so I think there's a frustration that we're at this point. You talked about it initially. We only have until July 27th. The Maine Democratic Party is trying to put on a convention with a lot of different moving parts. This is going to be sort of an unprecedented effort to try to figure this out. And so I think, to be in this position, to be in this last minute scramble in a race that was so important really does raise a lot of those questions about why was this vetting not done earlier? Why was it not more thorough? Why were there not more focused interviews with the candidate himself? I also think there's a lot of frustration on the part of Democrats with how Platner himself has handled this, sort of repeatedly insisting that as each scandal came out, that there was nothing more that could be unearthed. And as we saw, that was certainly not the case.
Yeah, there's this running joke on Capitol Hill. Susan Collins is concerned. It's her, whenever she talks about legislation, well, I'm very concerned. I feel like, frankly, Democrats at this point are the ones who are a bit concerned.
And Susan Collins is probably quite happy that the focus has kind of shifted off of her as a result of all of this. But Brooke, as I look at the letter that Graham Platner sent to the Department of Secretary of State in Maine, he notes people are desperate for change in that state, that he was somebody who advocated for a new kind of politics, and over 156,000 people voted for that. As you cast your eyes northward from your perch in Boston and look at this kind of scramble as you described it, this movement among Democrats to find candidates to run for this seat here at the 11th hour, what unifies them? Are there candidates who have that same kind of anti-establishment verve that really elevated Platner to the top of that initial primary?
Sure. And I don't think the issue is finding people who want to raise their hand. I think it's sort of narrowing down the field. We have at least 8 candidates who've sort of raised their hand of wanting to be interested in this position. And so I think finding a consensus among Maine voters in such a short period of time with the way that they're going about approaching this convention is really going to be the challenge. You had the Maine Democratic Party announcing late last night the process for how this convention would work. Each county chair is going to be hosting a nominating meeting where all registered Democrats can cast their vote for who they want their delegates to be in their respective counties. And then you're going to have the convention on July 25th. And the first candidate to achieve a majority is going to be the winner, but they're going to keep voting until they find a candidate who does get a majority. And it's important to remember that a number of these candidates actually ran and lost in the Maine governor's race. And that race was particularly close. You had pretty much every candidate sort of in that 20% range. And it was so close that the top vote getter actually did not win the race, because you then went on to ranked choice voting, and you had an alliance between 3 of the other members that sort of elevated them above Nirav Shah, who was the former CDC head in Maine during the pandemic. So the candidates are really all over the spectrum. You have a lot of them trying to grab this progressive mantle that, as you said, Graham Platner really carried. And that is what voters voted for. And so you're seeing a lot of these candidates really focusing on that messaging. Now, none of them really have the charisma that Graham Platner had, but sort of the most obvious progressive follow-on candidate would be former Maine Senate President Troy Jackson, who was endorsed in the governor race by Bernie Sanders, lost that race. He's one of the candidates that lost that governor race. And he was also Graham Platner's top pick in that governor race.
As you look at the big names that are possible to fill this seat, first of all, who is getting to choose? Who gets the final say? Does Platner get to have any say in picking his replacement, or is he just kind of PNG'd at this point out of the discussion? Do you think some of that anti-establishment, populist Democrat verve will be successful the second time around, or do you think there's going to be a bit of a retreat from that and voters may say, let's go with someone a little bit more predictable?
Sure. So he will not have a say in who the replacement is. That was a point of contention. That's one reason why this dragged on for as long as it did. And we didn't see Graham Platner officially quit the race until late yesterday. But the way that they're going about this is instead a convention-based approach. And I really think they're trying to do that to avoid a repeat of what happened with Joe Biden when he stepped aside, and there was sort of, a sense of a backdoor choosing of who the replacement was going to be versus a proper democratic process of picking a replacement. And so they're really trying to avoid that. They're bending over backwards to try to make this as clear and transparent as possible as one can possibly do under such a short deadline. Now, in terms of, what these ultimate candidates, what sort of message they will represent, I think the jury's still out because, a number of these delegates, it's not clear if they will be the type of people that voted for Graham Platner or if they might be sort of more your moderate, older Maine type voter. And so I think that it's really sort of an open debate over what this delegate is going to look like that's going to show up at the convention and participate in this nominating convention.
Brooke, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you very much. That's Brooke Sutherland, our Boston bureau chief, joining us on this Saturday. And a good morning to our listeners on 92.9 in Boston as well.
Show off. All right, coming up, they've got just what you need, but now in person. Wayfair pushing into physical retail stores.
You can explore live streaming news and interviews, all our Bloomberg TV shows, documentaries, reporter analysis, and more on one place. Check out Bloomberg.com/videos.
All right, David, everybody knows I just moved to New York, right? Although it's been about 6 months now. I unpacked my final box this week. I was so excited. But where do you buy furniture? Like I had to buy some stuff broke. Do you do it in person? Do you do it online?
I go in person. You're an online person?
I do like to go look at it in person. I like to see the size and things like that. But you can't always do that because not everybody has a store.
Yes.
And some things, frankly, are cheaper if you can get them online. And now one of the biggest online retailers is changing that up a little bit, I think, for people like us.
Yes, you're talking about Wayfair, best known as one of those options, but the once online-only retailer pushing into a brick-and-mortar store. Bloomberg's Carol Master caught up with CFO Kate Gullivar inside Wayfair's massive new Atlanta store for the latest episode of Bloomberg's Chief Future Officer.
We think about the cash-on-cash returns of the store. So based on the capital investment that we are making, when do we get that payback? What does that look like? We look at the four-wall economics of the store. So the sales within the store, how does that, how's the margin looking there, the sales associate cost? And then we look at the sales that are happening outside the store that we can tie directly to the store and the overall halo effect that we think we get from the branding.
Do you have a map in your office of some sort with push pins in it and saying, here's all the places we want to be? Like, how big do you think this can be, or do you expect it to be?
We have customers all across the country. Basically, if you mapped population center and our customers, they would overlap. So most population centers are going to be good locations for us to have a store.
The goal is to create a frictionless connection between online and offline commerce, a sort of virtuous circle. It's working well so far.
When customers who have seen us online come into the store, they're generally a bit surprised by actually the breadth of what we offer.
How does technology help in kind of making it seamless online to store?
I think
and vice versa.
The biggest thing is for the customer on the front end, that she can be in the store, that she can actually shop here, go back home, complete that purchase. And if you look at these sort of price tags and everything, they're all these digital tags. That's because they're the exact same prices they are online. So you're not going to be surprised that you saw something in the store and then you decided to purchase it online, that it's somehow different and that the offering is different. It's actually very consistent. But when she's here, she can have her app open and everything that she's doing here can be very similar to what she's doing at home. And I think that consistency is quite important.
Carol Masters here with us on
Hello.
set.
Good morning, guys.
I don't know if I'm offended that she went with she, her pronouns automatically, because it's also totally fair, because if I want to de-stress, if I want to not think about work, this is my happy place. And
most of their customers
are women. Because I asked her about that.
Yeah.
Like, did you do that on purpose? And she's like, well, the reality is it's a lot of women who are using their site.
Fair enough. And I do love, I mean, one of the reasons I don't buy big purchases like couches or rugs online, they can be so hard to return if you don't like them. It's smart that you can go in and like touch and feel and look at the thing.
I have to say it's fascinating that go back a few years, everybody was pushing back on brick and mortar. This is a company that's 25 years old. It's really technology based. If you go back to their co-founders in 94, 95, they were all engineers at Cornell. So technology is the underpinning, but they are realizing that by creating some stores, people will go there, and people who go to their stores, like 50% are actually new customers. So this is about building market share. They have about a little bit more than 2% of the, kind of the furniture market, the home goods market. And so they see a lot of room to expand their business. It's all about grabbing share right now.
So interesting. So new customers. So is it of someone who spends more money, or how is the customer different?
Well, it's a new customer.
Yeah.
So it's somebody who hasn't necessarily been to the Wayfair platform. So that's about increasing your customer base, and that's a big deal. The market they see as the total addressable market for like furniture and home goods. I mean, we all love it. We all go there. We all unwind that way. But they see it as about a $500 billion market, and they only have, like I said, about 2.3% of the market or so. And so they see an opportunity by getting new customers to grow that share.
So where are they seeing these stores? Because it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
We've talked to folks on this show about Class A real estate and how that's really snapped back. But like some of those larger Class B, Class C office spaces are still struggling. So I feel like there's probably quite a bit of space they could snap up for a good deal in a lot of places.
Now, the store we went to in Atlanta, 150,000 square feet. It was massive. It used to be an old Walmart.
See?
So exactly, they are finding space. And it seems very strategic. They have, I think, 3 stores right now, and then they're going to have 5 by the end of 2027. So they're getting ready to open up in Yonkers. I think they are looking at key markets where either through their platform, they are seeing a lot of activity and where it makes sense.
So it sounds like kind of like an IKEA, like the same kind of concept. Are things kind of built? Do they have the meatballs? I mean, come on.
They don't have the meatballs, and the prices in the store are the same online. And you can go to the store and their barcodes, so you can like use your phone and you can kind of build a cart. And then maybe you don't want to buy yet, and you can go home and think about it, and you'll get the same stuff on the platform. So there's no meatballs, but there is a cafe that was in the Atlanta store. I have to say, when Kate Gulliver and I, and she oversees so much. She oversees people, she oversees real estate, corporate communications, and obviously CFO and all that comes with that. But I mean, we got to the pillow area. I was like, I couldn't focus. It's very smart. And I'm like you, Christina, like I need to sit in things.
Yeah.
I need to feel it. I need to kind of get a feel of it. So I think it's kind of brilliant on their part. And I have to say, why isn't David here? Does he not buy pillows for the bed?
Wait a minute. I will say that when we were picking
We need to
furniture
ask
for
him
this
about
set,
this.
the one who was most actively passionate about our set furniture and colors was not me. It was David Gura. So David, I know we're gonna throw it back to you.
Give him a hard time about.
Well, I always give him a hard time, but I will specifically on this.
Did you ask him about that teeny tiny little wrench?
The Allen wrench.
The Allen wrench that it uses to put together the furniture. Like, it is such a nightmare for me. I put together an entire house.
I did not, but I know people at Wayfair, so I will ask them about the wrench for you. I feel like that's with so many furniture companies.
It's
right?
all the furniture companies. Lisa has a
is-
vendetta against the Allen wrench. We're going to get her some therapy after this. But
I will get back to you on that. Wayfair, if you are listening right now, please call me.
All right. Thank you so
You're
much.
welcome, guys. Have a good morning.
All right, we're coming up at 8 o'clock here in New York with the latest on President Trump's demands for Iran.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend, live from New York with David Gura, Christina Ruffini, and Lisa Mateo. The latest headlines, key analysis, big interviews, and the stories that hit home on your days off.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is 8 a.m. in New York from Bloomberg's world headquarters here in Manhattan. I'm Christina Ruffini.
I'm David Gura, alongside Lisa Mateo, bringing you the latest breaking news, reporting, and analysis live this morning and every Saturday and Sunday from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock Wall Street time. our focus on the Middle East. The president saying the ceasefire is over, but he's open to talks continuing. Our understanding is technical talks going to take place today in Oman.
Correct. Unclear who from the U.S. is actually participating in those talks. And the other big issue is the status of the Strait. Look, oil markets have largely stabilized despite this will they, won't they kind of deal. But we're going to dig into what that means and how that looks for the future if this uncertainty continues. First, we're going to go to Lisa with the headlines.
You got it. And President Donald Trump also issuing that stern warning that the U.S. military would, quote, completely decimate and destroy all areas of the Islamic Republic if its leaders tried or carried out his assassination. It was in his social media post. President Trump threatened that, quote, 1,000 missiles are locked and loaded and aimed at the Islamic Republic of Iran, with thousands more to immediately follow. Now, the president said he has a threat all the time and is number one on their list, and was previously briefed by the Biden administration officials regarding, quote, real and specific threats from Iran to kill him. Now, meanwhile, the U.S. demanding that Iran issue a public statement that all channels of the Strait of Hormuz are open to shipping and that they will not attack transiting civilian vessels. Senior administration officials say failure to do so would result in consequences. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy held a meeting Friday with U.S. Republican Senator Lindsey Graham in Kyiv. Now, the two discussed diplomatic efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Graham said the White House will support the latest version of the Russia sanctions bill.
If we can increase the lethality of Ukraine by sharing technology with them, and also put the world on notice, help President Trump end the war, stop buying cheap Russian oil and gas, then that's a winning combination.
In company news, Apple suing OpenAI for trade secret theft. It accuses the AI startup of a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. OpenAI denies those claims. Another milestone in the AI investment boom after SK Hynix's landmark U.S. stock offering. Bloomberg Tech's Ed Ludlow, he sat down with SK Group Chairman Che Tai-wan, who said he has an ambitious plan to invest more money in America.
The SK already invested more than $35 billion in U.S. side. My plan is at a much bigger number. So, much bigger than 35.
SK Hynix delivered a 13% gain in its debut trading day on a U.S. exchange after breaking the record for the biggest first-time share sale by a foreign company. The South Korean memory chip maker's American depository receipts, well, they finished their first session on Friday in New York at just over $168 each. That was below the $170 opening price, but still, that was way above the $149 offering price.
A celebratory mood there.
Very strong corporate blazer game going on there. Very good blazers.
A beat that they're very happy with, no doubt, and as Ed conveyed to us a little while ago.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. Right now, Iran's foreign minister is in Oman to discuss the future of the Strait of Hormuz, as U.S. officials are demanding Iran guarantee the waterway open and that the attacks stop.
Joining us now are Bloomberg Economics defense lead Becca Wasser and Bloomberg Economics Middle East geoeconomics lead Dina Esfandiari. She's the author of the book Triple Axis, Iran's Relations with Russia and China. So great to have both of you with us on this Saturday. I'm going to read here from the President of the United States, one of his recent posts. The Islamic Republic of Iran has asked us to continue talks, in quotation fingers, I'll do them there. We've agreed to do so, but the United States has stated to them in no uncertain terms that the ceasefire is over. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Both of you write in a recent note here that this is a familiar pattern, what we've seen play out over these last few days. Strikes interspersed with talks, and that this lower intensity conflict is going to be a feature, not a bug, as we move forward here. Dina, let me start with you, if I could. What do you make of the moment that we're in? We mentioned that there are technical talks supposedly underway. Where are we as the conclusion of this 60-day period isn't too far off?
Well, I think we are where we're going to be basically for the foreseeable future. I don't think these talks are going to make that much progress. Both sides' red lines are still too far apart, and neither side has really shown any willingness to move towards the other. And in the meantime, what they're doing is they're really trying to shape the negotiations, shape the ceasefire. Iran, for example, with its attacks in the Strait of Hormuz, is really trying to claim ownership over the Strait of Hormuz and demonstrate that ultimately, it's king there. And the rest of the world has to recognize it. And the U.S. is trying to get Iran to climb down from that position. So I don't think things are going to change. I think this is literally what it's going to look like for the foreseeable future.
So, Becca, what does that mean? Because you guys write in your latest piece, is a ceasefire over? What the strikes mean now? Iranian officials believe that pressure and especially bullying works with the Trump administration, and they're doubling down on that tactic. You go on to talk about how nobody has claimed responsibility for the attacks in the Red Sea, but it could be an effort to show that Tehran still has other pressure options it hasn't yet pursued.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where we find ourselves in a really tricky position, because Iran has a great deal of levers that it hasn't yet pulled, the Red Sea being a great example of that. But we see that kind of bullying tactics also taking place from the Trump administration, with the president routinely tweeting that, American missiles are locked and loaded on Iranian targets. And so both sides are trying to retain the threat of force to achieve their more geopolitical and geoeconomic aims. And so I think, to Dina's point, this is going to play out over the long term. We are looking at the potential for a protracted conflict, a long conflict where you do have these cycles of fighting and, rest and reconstitution in order to build up to get ready for the next round of potential attacks.
Dina, on the plasticity of the policies surrounding these meetings, we had the White House putting this waiver in place that allowed Iran to sell oil on the open market. On Tuesday of this week, they reversed course on that. And I'm just genuinely curious, sort of, were I in Tehran, what signal that would send to me about the U.S.'s openness to come to a deal here. So, perhaps the whole game here is just to attenuate this as much as possible, to push this to the midterms, et cetera, et cetera. But if there is to be an effort here at some sort of negotiation, what would I make of the U.S. reversing course on that so quickly?
I mean, as you said, nothing good. From Tehran's perspective, keep in mind that they have been negotiating with the United States now for over a year. Every time they have found themselves in negotiations with the United States, they've either been bombed, so over the course of the last two wars that the U.S. started, or in this case, made promises that the U.S. Did not keep in the end. Now, to be fair, of course, it was the Iranians that shot at the ships in the Strait of Hormuz, which is why the U.S. reversed course on sanctions. But at the end of the day, I think the problem that we're facing in the talks is that the two sides have signed this MOU, but are not interpreting it in the same manner. They don't see it unfolding in the same way, which is why we keep going back to these cycles of violence.
Yeah, a lot of that language was left, I think, specifically vague so that they could get both sides to sign on to it. But things like Iran agrees not to charge a toll for 60 days immediately to me said, well, then after 60 days they will. But of course, you heard from Washington, they were interpreting that a different way. And I think it's one of the reasons we got to where we are. Becca, I also want to ask you, I want to follow up on the oil question, because the other debate was whether or not that sanctions waiver really made a difference, right? Whether it was more than symbolic. And the symbolism of diplomacy does matter. But when you look at who is buying Iranian oil, who their big clients are, who is buying this, are they able to sell it? And is it, when I think about Russia and their oil shortage at the moment due to that conflict, is that related here? Are they a better or worse client for Iranian oil at this time?
Well, I mean, I think Iran hasn't relied solely on Russia for a little bit. I think there's also been conversations that were taking place from, India about buying Iranian crude. So there's a lot of options that Iran has had. But again, this has now been revoked. And for Iran, it was an incentive, a carrot, to try and get them to the negotiating table and to shape that next round of talks for the MOU that now is no longer there. And so there's probably going to be another round of carrots and sticks, and where that ends up, we'll see how it goes. But at the end of the day, it's not just about oil for now. It's about who controls the strait and is the strait open. And you see from the U.S. side a continued push to make sure that it is open in their terms. But right now they're trying to rely on Iran to at least issue a statement. But talk is cheap and actions are the things that actually matter here.
Dina, you watched, as we all did, the period of mourning that preceded the funeral for the late supreme leader in Iran, and obviously there were masses in the streets. And I'm wondering sort of what you took away from the way that unfolded, the degree to which that conveyed unity or not among leadership in Iran, sort of what we can take away from that huge ceremonial event that just concluded.
Well, I think what the leadership tried to do with this week-long funeral procession was to demonstrate unity, was to demonstrate that it still had support inside the country despite everything that we've seen, the war, the protests in January. This was their moment really to show that the Islamic Republic still has support inside Iran. And to a certain extent, they were able to show that. There were a lot of people that showed up. The funeral procession even went all the way to Iraq. There were many foreign dignitaries that showed up last weekend at the beginning of the procession. So in some ways, they were successful. But the issue for the Iranian leadership right now is that this war is buying them a little bit of time. People's attentions are distracted. They're focused on the war. They're focused on that ending. Once it's over, the Islamic Republic is really going to have to take whatever gain it manages to make as a result of these negotiations and start to use them to rebuild domestically, to sort out its economic issues, and there are many to sort out, and really try to overcome some of the crises that it's been facing over the course of the last few months.
And Becca, President Trump has had to deal with a little bit of Pottery Barn rules here, which is if you break it, you bought it, especially when it comes to the Strait. He's been very frustrated that American allies, especially NATO allies, have not been willing to come in and help secure passage and solve some of these issues. And we expected those frustrations to play out at this recent NATO summit in Ankara. And I know you've written about kind of the dynamics there, NATO leaders trying to prove to the president, show to the president they are increasing defense spending, they are good allies, it's worth it for America to stay in that alliance. And one of the prominent kind of leaders trying to sell himself there was the host, Erdogan, Turkey's president, who's trying to put Turkey in a position to be a really strong defense partner for the U.S. When I think of Turkey, I immediately think of that spat a little while ago with the Russian S-400 missiles. They wanted to buy Patriots, wouldn't let them. That they ended up reversing course, the F-35 program. Where does Turkey stand as far as defense manufacturing for the U.S., and where does Europe stand as far as defense contributions coming out of that NATO meeting?
Well, Turkey emerged as a big winner. Erdogan had a huge win, which is, Trump saying that he would reverse CAATSA sanctions on Turkey and allow Turkey to purchase the F-35. We'll see how that actually plays out because it all comes down to implementation. But right now, Turkey is very much positioning as though it's going to happen. So Erdogan came out a big winner, even if it meant that some of the guns that he gifted to NATO leaders as a thank you actually remained in Turkey for a variety of different reasons. But for Europe, I think also the NATO summit was pretty much a net win for them. They heard a lot of the similar, upset from President Trump, not helping enough when it came down to the Iran war, not increasing defense spending fast enough, not buying enough American equipment, and, Trump doubling down on his designs on Greenland. But overall, it seemed as though it was fairly steady with a reinforcing of the U.S.-European relationship, as well as America's commitment to continue to sell very critical arms to Europe, including potentially moving into having Patriot production in Ukraine and also selling Germany Tomahawk missiles that was previously going to be reversed. So the NATO summit, I would put in the relative positive column. That said, I do think that doesn't mean that tensions don't remain and they won't boil to the surface yet again.
David Gura, when we go to summits together, you never give me handguns like the Turkish president did to all the natives.
I don't know if President Trump kept the gold revolver.
You've never handed me I'm very upset by the lack of revolvers in our summit relationship.
I should know we're going to talk to Congressman Michael McCaul here in a bit about his recent trip to Ukraine. He's somebody who's been really pushing for them to have more missiles, more access to missiles on
air
the
defense,
especially on the battlefield. Dina, let me just end with you. We mentioned these technical talks, and I'm curious sort of what we know of what at a granular level is being discussed at this point in time. And I wonder what you make of just the focus there on the technical side of things, given what we know of how much effort and time went into securing the JCPOA the first time around. When you hear that the talks are technically focused, is that a positive sign that they're getting down to brass tacks here? Or is it perhaps alternatively a sign that because they can't agree on broader issues, there's ample room here to haggle over smaller things? How do you read just sort of where we are in terms of the talks right now?
And who is there?
And who's participating?
Yeah.
So no, I do think it's a positive that there are technical talks going on and that there are kind of lower level talks. They're really focusing on the details. I think that's what was lacking in the MOU. The MOU was like a one-page broad strokes document where even the language was very vague. And look where we are now as a result of it. So the fact that they're having technical talks, detailed talks on very specific issues, that's a good thing. I suspect the bulk of that will be focused on obviously Iran's nuclear program, the status of Iran's enrichment. Once the final deal is agreed to, will there be enrichment on Iranian soil? Won't there? Will there be a moratorium? How long will that last? What will happen to Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium, which disappeared after the last war? All of these things are things that they're going to be focusing on. There are also the issues on which neither side can really agree on. They were some of the sticking points that were there in the last few rounds of negotiations. So I think there is a little bit more willingness to compromise on these issues right now. The sticking point today, though, remains the Strait, the sanctions, and also the sequencing of the implementation of the MOU and also the final deal. So there's a lot of material to cover. There's a lot of sticking points to unstick, basically. And I think that my fear is that neither side really right now has the patience to do it. The critical issue is neither side wants to return to war. They're prepared to, but they don't want to. And that in itself is also good news.
All right, Dina and Becca, it's so nice to have you both. Lots of great bylines from the two of you in the terminal, and let's do it again soon. Thank you very much.
Becca Wasser and Dina Sfandiari, show me a more dynamic duo from Bloomberg Economics. I don't know. This is a great panel. Glad to have both of them.
I had so many more questions, but we have apparently a whole other show to do. We'll have to have them back because they talk about Russia and Europe and NATO.
And as you say, they're prolific. And for terminal clients, for folks at Bloomberg.com, so much great analysis from both of them, often quoted in Bloomberg News pieces as well. But just grateful to have their expertise here at Bloomberg.
All right, coming up, with American ships getting called to the Middle East as the war with Iran continues on, how ready is the U.S. Navy to continue that deployment? That is straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Welcome back. The United States is stepping up its military presence in the Middle East. More than 20 warships have been deployed to the region. CENTCOM just released this video of some of those ships and aircraft in close formation in the Arabian Sea just last week.
That's right. One of those ships, the USS Abraham Lincoln, is now setting a record for most consecutive days at sea, with its last reported stop in Guam in December. Look, the Navy is busy, to say the least, really busy, operating in several theaters, the Mideast, the Caribbean, Indo-Pacific, and more. And that's where we started our conversation with America's highest-ranking naval officer, Admiral Daryl Caudle, Chief of Naval Operations.
It is challenging. And one of the things I've worked on since coming in as the CNO is trying to actually, to the extent I can, tailor the forces that we provide our different combatant commanders globally to make sure I'm not stretched too thin. And so, of course, there's a lot of ships, 20-plus warships and auxiliaries in the Middle East. We're down in Venezuela doing humanitarian assistance there. We're conducting the Rim of the Pacific.
Do you need more boats? Do you have the vessels that you need? How many of the ones that you have are updated or you think need updating in the next 5-10 years?
Well, we have a congressional requirement for 355 warships. I teeter around 300 because my current decommissioning rate, it matches my build rate.
Okay.
So I never changed the overall size of the Navy. So one of the big initiatives with the president's current budget is to really energize shipbuilding in our country, to try to get us up to that number we are required to have. I do need a bigger Navy. There is a lot going on, and Navy's got a lot of responsibility.
I wanted to ask you that because on the civilian side, America doesn't really build ships anymore like it used to. I mean, commercial shipbuilding in the U.S. In 2022, the U.S. built just 5 ocean-going commercial ships. China built over 1,700, and South Korea built over 700. And the U.S. Navy currently estimates that China's shipbuilding capacity is 232 times our own. It costs twice as much to build a ship in the U.S. as it does elsewhere. Is that a national security concern?
Absolutely is. Like so many things that's happened in the U.S. as we've become a more service-oriented country, we outsource so much. And one of the things we made a decision on as a country at some point is to outsource commercial shipbuilding. And we're trying to reel that back a bit and get that back started again because it is a national security issue.
Talk to me about the Trump battleship, because there's a lot of questions and analysis in Congress about these Trump-class battleships. A lot of people are saying it's a vanity project. There's all these, I think, fairly untested things, this rail gun, this laser something. I don't know, maybe you can explain it to me. How do you convince Congress and lawmakers that you do need a class of warships? And would it be helpful to change the name of it? Do you think that would make it a little bit easier to get through congressional appropriations?
Well, I try not to get too wrapped around that part of it.
Fair enough.
I mean, he is the president, but the need for the large surface combatant has never been more pressing. When we move our carriers, which are nuclear powered around the world, I say we can be anywhere in 2 weeks. I'm usually limited in that transit overall speed by my inability to move as a composite force. And so,
what do you mean by that?
What I'm having to do is refuel the destroyers, which are gas powered, gas turbine powered. A very capable ship, but not nuclear. And so I need a large surface combatant, number one, that's nuclear powered. And we're really pressing to make this nuclear powered battleship to be that. Number two is I need more payload volume. So the battleship will be 4 times the payload volume of a destroyer with about 2 times the crew size. So if you can imagine the firepower of 4 destroyers with only twice the crew of 1 destroyer, that's a fairly good economy of scale there. There is some new technology on it, but we have to push forward on some new tech. I mean, that's what we do. I got my master's at the Naval Postgraduate School in the early 90s, and I did it all on directed energy and lasers. And we have not really evolved that to the point that we could. If I can get high-powered lasers on board my ships, then the defensive weapons I carry today can be shifted to that, and then I get more payload volume for offensive weapons. It's extremely important we press with directed energy.
As you're talking about being able to have bigger ships with fewer crew, less crew, how's the Navy doing right now? I know you've got a lot of ships way past their original deployment dates. Are you worried about force depletion? Are your sailors and officers getting exhausted? I am worried about it. I press very hard that we stick to our deployment timelines. It's important for us to do our normal rotations because overall, it's actually in the aggregate deliver more force like that. But sometimes the world gets a vote, and when I'm in conflict, I've got to keep them there. Our sailors rise to that occasion, but it does take a toll on the ships. Yeah. They've got to come in for maintenance too, right?
They got to come in for maintenance. It's hard on families. They're missing events they were planning on, thought their sailor was going to be back for sure. It extends maintenance periods a bit. When they come back, there's some thumb rules that we use on the extent that happens. We go through more repair parts. But the Navy is responsible for doing what it does. And so, what we see out of that, which is a little bit contrary to popular belief, is record reenlistments and retention.
I was just going to ask if it impacted retention and recruitment, but
it does in a very positive way. And so, these sailors join to see the world, to be combatants, to live in the profession of arms, and it's very important that they get to do what they do. Part of why we have had record recruiting and brought in 45,000 sailors this year, 3 months ahead, making goal, is because of 3 things, I think. Number one is mission. They love our mission. Okay. Number 2, they want to serve. Okay. And so, that's part of that mission package. We have really invested in our recruiters to make them the high end and train them properly. A little bit of a playbook from the Marine Corps, who's always, I think, done that perhaps better.
They did have very good commercials when I was growing up.
Yes, they do. And we're trying to follow suit on that. And then just the amount of attention the administration pays to recruiting and backing, making it so important to have a strong military has played a positive role.
But does the administration listen to you when you say we are too many places at once? We need to make some decisions here?
Well, the way that's done, the way I voice that is through the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and he carries my water on that very effectively. And so those things that are concerning to me as a service chief, like readiness and families and extended deployments and the things that does, all that's conveyed. And we make recommendations on that, and we try to rotate our force, sustain our force, and do all those things. And at the end of the day, the greatest compliment we can get as a Navy is to be needed and to be utilized. And so we rise to that occasion.
The U.S. has used approximately half its pre-war inventory for key precision strike missiles and Patriots in the conflict in Iran. Manufacturing a Tomahawk or some of these bigger munitions takes about 4 years. U.S. intelligence analysts estimate an extremely high likelihood that China is going to try to take action against Taiwan by the year 2027. Is this impacting readiness? And is the current conflict in Iran making it harder for you to be ready for what could come, especially when it comes to security threats in the Indo-Pacific?
I've never seen in my 41 years anything to be more singularly focused on shipbuilding and munitions production than we are right now. The Deputy Secretary of War Feinberg is running a munitions acceleration council, and all the services are part of this. We're really investing in these companies. One of the things that's held us back from producing at the rates that we needed to is we call it single vendor lock.
Yeah.
We were really held up by solid rocket motor production by one company. We've opened that space up to 3 companies now. Okay, we're trying to make longer contracts that Congress has not always been behind. They like shorter contracts. By extending that out, these companies are more likely to recapitalize and put more money into their own infrastructure, get the employees that they need, run multiple shifts, maybe borrow some money from the government or some of the strategic capital.
But there's still going to be a lag. I mean, even if you cut that time in half, you're looking at a bare minimum of 2 or 3 years where you've got half the things to fire at the bad guy than you used to.
That's right. Raytheon's RTX is a big one for me. They own all my Standard missiles, SM-2, 3, 6, and they own the torpedo that we shoot and TLAMs. And so they've gone to multiple shifts. They're now unconstrained by this, solid rocket motor. They're heavily investing. And I think you're going to see a knee in the curve on this, where your proportions are not going to be just linearly affected. It's going to go high order through these investments, and we're going to get up on the step.
But in this part of the curve, what do you do operationally? How do you compensate for that?
Well, fortunately for the Middle East with Epic Fury, Navy munitions, we're in a pretty good place. For TLAMs, what we're able to do is some that we're going back in for their periodic recertification. We end up shooting those, and so not tampering with the ones that were still in their normal life cycle of periodicity. And then we haven't had to, because the threats haven't required it, for me to shoot a lot of my Standard missiles. Navy's in pretty good shape. And I think the Army, there's been a lot of, Patriots shot, but all of us are moving toward a lower size munition. You hear Coyote, which is essentially a Hellfire size missile. Roadrunner is another one like that, where we're actually matching better the threat of a one-way attack for $5,000 with a weapon that's more in line with that, and quite frankly, more capable to take that out. So our learning curve is very high on matching the threat to the missile system. That's going to give us the breathing room to get our big missiles back in inventory.
So you're not worried about it?
I'm not worried about it, no.
Is the government contracting system broken?
I think historically one could assert with high confidence that, I would call it broken in a pejorative kind of way. It was never really good. And part of that is, contracting strategies are hard when you're near monopolistic type environments where you have, you don't have a lot of competition. So part of the administration's effort in the Secretary of the Navy's all over this, and the Secretary of War as well, is trying to figure out how to build more competition. That has to come through incentivizing more players to get into it in the U.S., of course, and that's the idea, is to do that in the United States. But I think one of the catalysts to do that is working with foreign partners.
Really?
And so to open
that doesn't concern you? We just talked about the lack of U.S. industrial base.
Well, I actually sometimes had to have some Field of Dreams models in place to actually get this done.
Okay.
You'll sometimes colloquially hear about the Finland model of how we're doing icebreakers for the Coast Guard. So, kind of to build a couple there, teach our workforce how to do it, get the supply chain healthy, and then move that production line to the U.S. That's pretty appealing to me, actually. And because I have a lot of shipbuilders, but they need the breathing room to get the industrial changes they're doing with technology, robotics, and artificial intelligence, recapitalization, and all the things that they're putting into their workforce to develop them. And it gives me some breathing room to get those things working while I'm actually delivering the ships we talked about earlier.
So we will have the second part of that tomorrow. I also asked him about mines in the Strait, autonomous naval vessels. They're getting ready to launch one of those, and a bunch of other stuff. So we'll dig into it.
Particularly struck by what he had to say about recruiting and retention.
Yeah.
Maybe a bit of a surprise to me that you put sailors, officers through these long deployments. They would be eager to sign on once again. It does sound like that is in fact the case. He didn't seem overly concerned about that being an issue. He actually seemed quite sympathetic to how difficult that is for a lot of these folks' families.
He is, and apologies, we're having a bit of a fire alarm here in our building. Don't worry. We'll power through.
Carry on.
We'll power through. But it's interesting in that, exactly right. I assumed that if you're watching these ships be out for almost a year at a time, that would make you not want to sign up. But he said they haven't had a recruitment retention problem. And also he said this administration puts a lot of emphasis on military recruiting numbers. That's very important to them. So I think that's therefore very important to make sure they're keeping those numbers up and keeping the administration happy.
I want to go lastly to your reaction at the end there when he talked about looking elsewhere for manufacturing help, design help on ships and other weapons. Indeed, it is a surprise, but does sound like it's now kind of like a broader view that they're taking on where they can kind of benefit from.
Well, it is especially where we started the conversation where I said, is it a national security risk that we don't have the shipbuilding base we used to? And he said yes, but after our interview, some news broke that possibly the U.S. Navy has been talking to South Korea about their shipbuilding capabilities. He mentioned the Finland model, working with NATO allies. But again, that goes back to having good relationships with those NATO allies. And that's a relationship that's been a little tense at the moment. We've been talking about maybe on slightly better feet after the Turkey-Ankara summit. Seems to have gone well. But that's one of the reasons the U.S. does need NATO, as well as NATO needing the U.S. is for capability like this, including minesweeping, which we also ask about in tomorrow's segment.
All right, more from the Admiral tomorrow here on Bloomberg This Weekend. Coming up next, it's underfunded and research is limited, but 2 million Americans experience ringing in their ears. We get into tinnitus here. Next on Bloomberg This Weekend on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, Bloomberg.com, and the Bloomberg Business app. Stay with us.
Thanks for joining us live on Bloomberg This Week, and I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. A big win for Spain in the World Cup. Its team defeated Belgium 2-1 in Los Angeles yesterday in the quarterfinals. Spain will now advance to play France. That's on Tuesday in Dallas. And that means, yes, there are now 2 semifinal spots left today. We have Norway battling England at Miami Stadium. And Argentina, they're taking on Switzerland. That's over at Kansas City Stadium. Over to Wimbledon right now. Jannik Sinner, he defeated Novak Djokovic. This is rough for me. And Alexander Zverev. He topped Arthur Frey, setting the stage for the men's final tomorrow. A pair of Czech stars today. They're going to square off in the women's final. You have Karolina Muchova battling Linda Noskova. Oof. The PGA Tour continues with the Genesis Scottish Open at the Renaissance Club, topping the leaderboard. A 3-way tie for first between Jordan Smith, Tom Kim, and also Rory McIlroy at 9 under par. They were followed by Matt Fitzpatrick at 8 under par. And Pitbull fans, they are in the spotlight for their love of the music star. Ahead of Mr. Worldwide's performance at BST Tide Park in London on Friday, they broke the Guinness World Record for the largest gathering of people wearing bald caps. I kid you not. Pitbull is known for his shaved head, right? He spoke about the new record from backstage.
Record breaking, record making, history in the making. Thank you, London. Thank you to the fans. Thank you, Hyde Park. Thank you to the Baldies. I want to say thank you to Tucanes de Tijuana for my hat.
That's a great hat.
No mames.
Pitbull said he started actually noticing audience dressed like him back in 2021, so it's become a thing. So he did in London because that's where his biggest audience and fans are.
Amazing.
Pitbull, David.
There you go. Thank you, Lisa Mateo. I'll take a look.
Thanks. I love me some Pitbull, but I don't know if I'm wearing a bald hat to go with it.
Go join the crowd.
I'm being told we're tied on time, and you two are lucky.
I'm very sorry. All right.
That was unexpected, David
Lisa
Gura.
Mateo, thank you very much. We live in a world where loud is equated with fun, but for hundreds of millions of people, they're paying a high price for that. They have tinnitus. Bloomberg Pursuit staff writer Hannah Elliott warns that someone you know has it and that it's a ticking time bomb.
That's right. Not just fire alarms here in the studio. In the United States, the American Tinnitus Foundation says over 50 million people are suffering. That's 15% of the population. And it's so bad for about 2 million Americans, they're actually debilitated by it. Veterans, musicians, people who love concerts and motor sports are all at an increased risk. And for Hannah, writing the story was deeply personal.
My husband has it. And the funny thing is, my husband's a car guy, and as you know, my day job is mostly writing about cars in the car world. And I started to realize that when you're in a group of car people, the minute you mention tinnitus, everyone starts to come out of the woodwork and says, I have it, or my buddy has it, or my brother has it, or my dad has it. And I just started to realize, oh, in this tiny segment of car people, it's very prevalent. And then it started to spill out into, oh, my motorcycle friends talk about it. Oh, my musician friends talk about it. And it became this thing where it's like, wow, this seems to be very common, but no one's really talking about it because some people can kind of live with it and others don't want to talk about it because it's so frustrating that there's no cure. So they don't talk about it at all. And it just got me very, very curious about what's really going on, who's affected and why. That's kind of how I came into it.
So you talked to folks who are suffering from this. You talked to doctors, other experts. You had a suspicion that it was widespread. Just how widespread is it? How big a problem is this when you look at the world?
Yeah, so tinnitus, and I think we should say, it's correct to say tinnitus or tinnitus, both are correct, is basically the perception of a sound in your head or your ears that is not coming from an external source. So that could mean ringing, buzzing, whooshing, a scratching or static sound. It can be very isolating because it's difficult to be in environments that you can't control sound-wise if your ears are really sensitive to sound, triggers, and also just having this noise in your head that no one else can hear. It's really, really, it can be really debilitating.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my dad asked me, we were out camping and it was really, really quiet. And I remember him asking me if I could hear silence. And I said, yeah, can't we all? And he said no, because he'd been a tank commander in the military and he always had a constant ringing in his ears. He never hears silence anymore because there's always something there. But it's not, I always thought it was hearing loss. You said it's not a disease and it's not hearing loss. Do they know what causes it?
That's exactly right. And that has been a really big sort of misconception about tinnitus. It can be related to hearing loss because noise exposure is the biggest known cause of tinnitus, which is just being exposed to too loud noises. But tinnitus and hearing loss are two separate things. And a lot of the people that I spoke with, including my husband, who is how I first became aware of it, have excellent hearing. Tinnitus is a separate thing, and that has really gotten in the way of some of the research. Every audiologist and clinical technician and medical professional who I spoke with said tinnitus is so under-researched and underfunded exactly because of what you're describing, which is that it's usually lumped in with hearing loss and hearing damage.
Somebody you spoke with was John Ginty, Grammy-nominated organist, drag racer in Sarasota. He compared it to phantom limb syndrome. I'll just quote a bit from your piece. You take somebody whose arm has been amputated and they wake up with pain in their hand. Well, the hand's not there, but the pain is real. That's how it is with tinnitus. It's something that your brain is making up, but it was almost giving me panic attacks.
Crazy.
Talk a bit about the effects this has. You alluded to this just a moment ago, the difficulty of suffering with this. What does that mean in terms of mental health? Again, not acknowledging the fact not everybody would have the same kind of effects broadly, but what's it mean for folks who do have this?
Of course, there is a really big connection between poor mental health and tinnitus. And there are a lot of, there's a lot of research and there are a lot of studies that link anxiety with tinnitus, both as a trigger and as a result. It's sort of this very sad cycle of tinnitus can cause depression, anxiety, isolation, but also those things can lead to increased tinnitus triggers. So it is all linked. Just the fact that when people are told by their medical providers that there's no cure and there's really nothing we can do about tinnitus, about this thing that is really affecting your daily life, that would be depressing for anybody. Mm-hmm. So there tends to be a sense almost of despair for a lot of people that there's no cure, there's nothing we can do. You have to live with this, as some people describe it to me as a jet engine roaring in their head. Of course, that causes extreme mental anguish, and that in turn can just lead to really a poor quality of life, and even worse. Of course, there have been even cases of suicide related to tinnitus. Multiple people I spoke with for this piece told me that they had felt, I can't live like this anymore. They really got to a very dark place about their tinnitus.
So now that people are becoming more aware, I mean, I just keep going back to 50 million people, 15% of the population. That's a lot of people. I'm wondering if doctors and audiologists are starting to take it more seriously, and if you think in the next couple years they're making any progress or they're working towards possible solutions.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I really think the time is right to be talking about tinnitus because, as we all know, everybody is obsessed with youth and longevity and trying to, basically health max ourselves into somehow living forever as, very hot, sexy people. The thing is, tinnitus is connected to brain health, which is connected to even cognitive decline and even dementia. So there are strong links that indicate we need to be paying attention to this. And I think as a broader culture, as millennials, I'm an elder millennial, as boomers, sort of realize we need to be taking care of our bodies and our minds so we can have the best life as we get older. This issue of protecting your hearing, taking care of your hearing, which is linked to your brain health, which is linked to your cognitive health, that is only going to increase. The other great thing to know is that in 2023, the FDA did finally approve one treatment for tinnitus called Linear, which is a device that combines sounds and tiny electrical pulses that you put on your tongue as a way to sort of retrain your brain. That was approved in 2023, and I spoke with many people who have used the device and say that it helps. And I've talked with technicians who think that it's very promising and hopefully will help lead this surge into more research, more funding, more treatment.
Hannah Elliott, our colleague and fellow elder millennial. Hannah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Hannah.
You.
Welcome back to Bloomberg This Weekend. It is time for BT Dubs. I'm Christina Ruffini with David Gura. I would like you to know that I did get an email from a viewer in Singapore who said he really liked BT Dubs.
With a D, D-U-B-S.
Well, I mean, it was written in the letters, but I read it as BT Dubs. But he said he liked this segment.
Well,
so Lisa Mateo is going to catch us up.
Thank you to all our viewers, even the wrong ones.
Don't insult our viewers like that.
I love it. Are you guys caught up with Love Island?
I am not.
Lisa, I
am not.
swear to,
that will come
we
as
got
no surprise to
and Love
anybody.
Island out of you today.
This is going to be great. I had a watch party at my house last week from
Seriously?
my daughter's friends. This is huge with this generation, I'm telling you. Okay, so I want to go first let's go to this first. This is from Bloomberg.
Okay.
Love Island USA cracked the code on Gen Z's attention span because they are addicted to it, okay? You know who is also watching it is Michelle Obama and her daughters.
Former First Lady.
Yes. Listen to what she says.
Mother-daughter time.
Okay.
Because, and they're behind. They got me hooked. And I was like, if you started the next season, and they were like, no, we're busy. It's like, you need to.
Okay.
You need to get some more free time.
See, so even you guys are not in the loop.
No.
Okay?
Tell
I
me
am
about
surrounded by this. So it's on Peacock, okay? It's a reality TV show. You have all these
British,
singles.
right?
It started with the UK, now they have a US version.
Oh, okay. All
Okay,
right.
so they're on this island and they couple up. So the basic premise is if you don't couple up, you're going to get kicked out.
Wow.
You're going to get the boot.
Make it happen.
And then people are voting at the same time whether who should couple up, who should get kicked off the island.
Hot people in drama, right? This is what it's like. Hot people in relationship drama.
Exactly what it is.
Yeah, this is my nightmare, Lisa. But okay.
But here's the thing, it's so big, like bars are showing it. Like, they show sports games.
Yes.
They're showing Love Island.
Wow.
They're doing watch parties, they're doing all these things. Prediction market Kalshi, there is $32 million in trading volume to see who gets kicked off the island. I'm telling you, I cannot make this up.
Are you like Michelle Obama? You're like all in.
I'm half. I'm not as
Half
much as
in,
her.
okay.
Yes, but I'm surrounded by it because all I hear is my son and my daughter talk about Love Island. And did you know this? And did you know this? And did you know?
All right.
I had
Do you
no
love Island,
idea.
David Gura?
I've never seen it, but I might stream
Yes,
it.
you might stream it.
Yeah.
It's on Peacock.
You do that, come report back.
Well, the whole thing,
tomorrow.
the finale is tomorrow. So, you got to
Jump right in.
You got to jump in.
right
You got to
in.
jump in. Okay. Let's go to food. How
Clearly,
about
I missed
that?
that.
Okay.
That was a BTW.
Okay.
I missed that story.
Sorry. Have you ever had pasta in Italy?
Yes.
Yes.
No, I've
Okay,
never
so
been to
listen to
Italy.
this one.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah. There's an admission.
Well, I haven't either.
David, you've been so
She hasn't either.
I haven't either.
All right,
I know.
I'll hold
We're
on
not
to
as
it.
far
On the
traveled
road.
as you.
All right, the one
This
the
is
last
the
name
one-
Ruffini will do the Italy
Washington
section.
Post,
Yeah.
okay, says in Rome, a new tourist trap emerges: pasta making nonas.
Oh.
So they have the grandmothers in the windows of the restaurants, and the tourists love it because
bet
they're
they
saying,
do.
"Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, look at this!" You know, locals say the
Autentico.
locals are not happy with it.
Really?
The locals say it's not traditional. Like this is just a marketing stunt. They don't like it. It's it's putting them in a bad light. But the tourists love it, and it's getting people in the door, and they just love seeing these women in the window making fresh pasta.
Well, let's pause and have Christina tell us about one of her favorite meals she's had in Italy. I'm sure you had some good pasta.
I will absolutely do that. All right, Naples.
Okay,
Naples is
yeah.
an underrated city, in my opinion. Very close to Pompeii. Has all that volcanic ash, so they have amazing soil and they have great tomatoes. And it was just a caprese pizza with tomato and mozzarella, and it had lemon olive oil dribbled on it, and it's still one of the best things I've ever eaten, and I've never found its equal anywhere I've tried.
See,
so
we're missing out, David.
We
I
are.
don't know.
Just
Naples.
my Newman zone and
Get
my
on it. I'm sure.
Frozen
Listen, you're in
pizza.
Brooklyn. There's great food. You're fine.
All right, question for you, David.
Yes.
When you wear a suit, do you like slim fit? How do you like comfortable?
I used to really
how
love
is
that.
this?
As I've aged, I've grown less fond of the slim fit
have.
suit. I also have very large calves.
You really?
Hard with the slim fitting suit.
Oh no, I'm learning a lot of stuff about you today, David
I enjoy
Gura.
this segment because I get to introduce myself to the audience.
Okay.
I mean, that's fair though. But like those slim fit things are cut very, very.
But
You gotta see
there's
the
a
tailor.
trend. There is a new trend. Okay, this is in the Wall Street Journal. In a protein maxing era, men want tight suits. We're going
Interesting.
beyond slim
Not
fit.
slim,
Okay,
tight.
Not like Daniel Craig, in the slim
Right,
fit
well
suit.
tailored.
We're talking like Conor McGregor, athletes who are huge. Look
No,
at
I
Conor
hate this.
McGregor.
This is bad
they're
tailoring.
huge,
I hate
and they're
this.
very,
Hard to
very.
move.
The muscles
That's
are
exactly
bulging. Things like that. And this is the new thing. Stylists say, you know what? Maybe you should avoid the trend. Some like it, some don't. But it's huge. There's companies out there that are really doing well on this. Brands like State and Liberty. They do NFL players, and other folks too. So this is I don't know.
But wait, there is something behind this trend.
Tell me.
Because it is cheaper to produce a tighter suit. There's less material in it than it is like a old school pleated, like wide leg suit. And these cuts are cheaper to produce. And it's one of the reasons hems on pants have come up. It's one of the reasons that your pants are sitting lower. And it's one of the reasons they are pushing the trend of tighter jackets is they are cheaper to produce. They cut costs.
kidding.
So it's not just about how they look.
See?
They're selling it to guys being like, you can show off your muscles, but also better on the manufacturing end.
But I think you have to be of a certain stature.
Well,
to wear
a
these
certain
suits.
musculature.
So-
Yes.
Sorry, David.
No, no need to apologize, Lisa.
You want to?
I feel like, what are they made of? They can't be made of like wool and cotton, are they? They gotta have a little give,
know,
a
they
little
seem so
stretch.
uncomfortable.
They got to have a little stretch
That's
in
one of the
there.
things I've always been jealous about guys' suits is when we wear blazers, they're always really tight, and you guys have some more room.
I'm able to move my arms.
All right,
Yeah.
should I hit one more real quick?
Yeah, very
All right, What do you
quickly.
think? Okay, BDR, the number of young Americans living with their parents is at a record high.
that's fair.
Interesting.
Hello, my 24-year-old still at
Full
home. It's
circle
all
to
good,
Love
though.
Actually time. Not Love Actually, Love Island, sorry. Maybe
Yes,
watch
yes,
Love
yes.
Actually, too.
So yeah, it's a study. A fifth of 25 to 34-year-olds live with their parents or grandparents, and it's a record high. I mean, affordability. We've been talking about it. You know it. It's tough out there, and I have to give it to them.
That makes total sense. And the stigma, I feel like, has gone away too because people are like, what else are you gonna do? Yeah.
Tight suits, extended childhood,
And Love Island.
big calves.
Love
Pitbull.
Island.
Covered
It's
a lot here.
fantastic morning.
Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate that. BTW, as the segment is known.
Yeah, we'll see if
To
that
the
same viewer writes
cognoscenti.
back
All right.
enthusiastically after that segment.
We're coming up on 9 o'clock here in New York. We head to Ukraine with Congressman Michael McCall, Chairman Emeritus of the Foreign Affairs Committee, as Russia and Ukraine trade attacks on key grain export gateways.
The next hour of Bloomberg This Weekend starts right now.
Coming up on Bloomberg This Weekend, President Trump threatens to hit Iran with 1,000 missiles if he's targeted for assassination, as the U.S. demands that Iran tell the world the Strait of Hormuz is open.
Plus, President Trump promises Patriot missiles to Ukraine.
We're going to give a license to you to make Patriots. That's pretty cool, right?
How that could change the war with Russia. Congressman Mike McCall met with the Ukrainian president yesterday and will join us live from Kyiv.
And Apple sues OpenAI, the artificial intelligence company accused of poaching workers and stealing company secrets.
Meanwhile, shares of the chipmaker SK Hynix rose 13% in their Wall Street debut. The company's chairman talks to Bloomberg about the largest public listing by a foreign company in the U.S. ever.
We've been waiting for that for a long, long time.
Welcome, everybody, to Bloomberg This Weekend. Coming to you live from Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York City. I'm David Gura.
I'm Christina Ruffini. We're here with Lisa Mateo. It is Saturday, July 11th. And of course, we are focused on what is happening in the Strait as well as the rest of the world. But this hour, we're going to pivot a little bit and talk a lot about Ukraine, about how the Ukrainians are using these cheaper, light weapons to attack Russia on the interior. And we're going to talk to Congressman Mike McCaul, who just got honored from President Zelenskyy over there and has been spending some time over there on the front lines and looking at what the situation is.
Order of Merit, second class for Mike McCaul, and I just want to point out he's advanced legislation in the House to kind of take lessons learned from the battlefield in Ukraine, bring them to the Defense Department here in the U.S., do more to kind of integrate the two countries' approaches to defense.
Exactly right. All right, but first we're going to start with Lisa Mateo and our news updates.
Yeah, we also have all about those threats to the president for his life. Now, President Trump, he has been the target of several assassination attempts, not just this last one. During the 2024 presidential election, he was briefed by the Biden administration officials regarding, quote, real and specific threats from Iran to kill him. Now, on his way back from the NATO summit in Turkey earlier this week, the president switched Air Force One planes at a British military base. At the time, Trump denied the decision was prompted by a security concern. Well, President Donald Trump now says the U.S. will continue talks with Iran, but considers the ceasefire between the countries to be over. Meanwhile, the U.S. demanding that Iran issue a public statement that all channels in the Strait of Hormuz are open to shipping and that they will not attack transiting civilian vessels. Senior administration officials, they say failure to do so would result in consequences. To the war in Ukraine, where Ukraine's state emergency service says at least 10 people, including a child, were injured after Russia launched an overnight missile and drone attack on Kyiv. Ukraine's Air Force says Russia launched 10 missiles and more than 120 drones against Ukraine. The Mexican builder fatally shot by an ICE officer in Houston is being mourned. And now the three men who survived that shooting, they say no officer was threatened. A lawyer for the men, they say an officer shot and killed Lorenzo Salgado Arroyo through the passenger side window during that attempted traffic stop earlier this week. Department of Homeland Security claims Arroyo rammed into an ICE vehicle. The officers were not wearing body cameras. President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, he said they have to wait for the investigation to play out.
Because who knows, is there body cam footage? Is there cell phone videos? Like what happened in Minnesota, there was actually a city camera captured something. So let the investigation play out. If the officers acted outside policy or illegally, they'll be held accountable.
And in Maine, Democrats continue to scramble to find a last-minute replacement for Graham Platner after he officially withdrew from the race for a U.S. Senate seat following allegations of sexual assault. The party announced it will hold a nominating convention on July 25th, where more than 600 delegates will vote on a replacement nominee. And Apple suing OpenAI for trade secret theft. It accuses the AI startup of a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. OpenAI, though, denies those claims. David and Christina, over to you.
Lisa, thank you very much. Interesting to talk about that with Ed just a little while ago. Ed Ludlow, about the fact, this is a real thing in Silicon Valley right now, this kind of fight for talent in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it surprises me. It's gone beyond, it seems like, the usual corporate shenanigans they're arguing it was a concerted effort and one that should have legal consequences.
Interesting to hear the allegation that they were kind of coaching folks leaving Apple how they might do it. OpenAI was, and we'll see how that plays out.
How to do it kindly, how to get that 2 weeks notice so you don't get walked out the door, and what possibly
and what
information
maybe to download on the way out.
Exactly
Again,
right.
Alleged in the complaint. I don't want to say that's happened. We'll see what happens in court. Lisa, thank you very much. And joining us now to talk more about the latest in Iran is Bloomberg's D.C. senior editor, Wendy Benjaminson. Wendy, great to talk to you. I'm going to have the control room put up one of these posts from the president, this one having to do with these talks that are underway in Oman today. He says the Islamic Republic of Iran has asked us to continue talks. We've agreed to do so, but the United States has stated to them in no uncertain terms that the ceasefire is over. And then the usual thank you for your attention to this matter. Wendy, customarily, when there are big negotiations like these, you have the backing of, they're done under the imprimatur of the President of the United States. From this, what we've heard from the President at the NATO summit, he is taking, shall we say, a hands-off approach to these talks. And I wonder sort of how that's shaping the way that they're unfolding in Oman.
Well, that's an excellent point, David. And one of the major point is are they even talking about peace with the U.S. and Israel in those talks? Or, as Iran says, are they in Oman to talk to Oman about how the two countries will administer the Strait going forward? Because a lot of what fell apart here was a section of the Memorandum of Understanding about administering the Strait. The Memorandum of Understanding that the U.S., had a large part in writing says Iran will come up with a plan to manage the Strait. And the U.S. meant free of charge. But Iran read it differently. And so I think that's what's going on right now. Remember, they restarted the hostilities. They took pot shots at these cargo ships in the Strait, and the U.S. retaliated, hence the ceasefire being over. And now, and that's what Trump is talking about. But these talks may or may not be about any of the things the U.S. really went to war about, like their nuclear program or things like that. So we really need to see what comes out of these talks, if anything.
Yeah, sources telling me a couple of weeks ago, the Omanis were very upset. They feel like they were played at the start of this conflict when they were hosting and intermediating those talks between the U.S. and Iran, which they see now as kind of a ruse for the U.S. to gear up and start that military action. And this is kind of a consequence of that. There was previously pretty good relationship between the Omanis and the U.S. I went there during the first Trump administration with Secretary of State Pompeo. These were governments that spoke to each other, but there have been a lot of fallout, both physically and diplomatically, from this conflict. The other question I wanted to ask you about these talks, so we hit on this all the time, but when you talk about technical level talks, usually you have this huge team of experts from the State Department, from the NSC going. It's unclear if anyone from the U.S. is going at that level. But even when you have Witkoff and Kushner going, they do have influence of the president. But I wonder what it's like to even engage in these talks knowing that the only person who really has the final word is the president, and he can change his mind at any point. That can be helpful in some ways, busting through bureaucracy, but it also can make the job of these interlocutors basically negligible.
Absolutely, Christina. You couldn't be more right. I mean, you've got a picture, Witkoff and Kushner sitting in the room across the table from their Iranian counterparts and saying, okay, we've agreed to this, great, done. And then they go back to the White House, or they call the White House, and Trump says absolutely not. So it's really not as well organized as these things could be. Also, they've just I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
No, I mean, that's fair enough. I don't think there's more to say than that. I just wanted to check myself with someone who's also covering this and see if we all think this is a problem.
Wendy, I'll ask you this lastly about the kind of flow of traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. So what we're hearing from the administration now, what's been reported is the White House wants a statement, a kind of grand statement from Iran, emphasizing the fact that the Strait is open. And I think something we talk a lot about on the show is the message that's being sent to industry, to shipping companies, to those who are on those ships, about the relative safety of the waterway that they're in. Talk a bit, if you would, Wendy, just about, obviously, the administration's eagerness to have safe and regular flow through the Strait of Hormuz, and sort of what this might do for them, why this is so important for Iran to just make this statement fundamentally.
Well, it is important for them to make a statement if the world can trust the statement, that because then there is some certainty. I mean, there are a lot of shipping companies, a lot of oil customers, just a lot of business that doesn't trust that they can send a ship through the Strait and get through safely and peacefully. And so why take the risk unless you have some written assurance? The trouble is that, sure, Iran could say, sure, everybody come through the Strait, it's going to be free, everything's going to be fine, and then change their mind, or then be triggered, not exactly, but I'm reacting to yet another thing Trump says, or Trump will find that they didn't do it well enough. He'll fire a missile, they'll fire back. It all could go wrong. And just back on the technical talks for a minute, Christina, you were so right about the high level. I mean, in the first Iran nuclear deal, those technical talks were between nuclear physicists on both sides. Yeah. They were between people who are absolute experts in building nuclear weapons and building civilian nuclear energy so that they could know the difference. With all respect to Witkoff and Kushner, I don't think either of them are able to discuss the nuclear program at that level, and I don't know who their counterparts are on the Iran side.
All right, Wendy Benjamin, our senior DC editor, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, as we were talking about earlier, South Korea memory chip maker SK Hynix just pulled off the largest public listing by a foreign company in U.S. market history. Shares soared 13% on their first day of trading.
Well, the CEO said customers are asking for long-term supply agreements. Earlier this morning, we spoke with Bloomberg tech host Ed Ludlow about SK Hynix's growth push. You're here in New York because you sat down with the chairman of the SK Group.
Yes.
Within that organization, there's SK Hynix, which makes these memory chips crucially important as we look at kind of where AI is going and where AI-related hardware is going as well. So you sat down with the chairman of that company yesterday. What did he say about the prospects for that company in this field? What's it going to mean for the production of chips broadly, for memory chips in particular going forward as we see this expansion?
Yeah, this was the biggest US first-time share sale by a foreign company. So they have their own shares in Korea, common shares that are listed in Seoul, and now they have American depository receipts. One ADR represents 1/10 of one Korean share, but it set records. They raised money for a reason. They need to build more capacity for memory chips that go into consumer electronics, like Apple makes with the iPhone, but more critically in the AI age, high bandwidth memory, which is lots of layers of DRAM memory into data centers. And the biggest takeaway for me from that is, despite their best efforts and being on the hook for hundreds of billions of dollars, they say their supply may never catch up with the growing demand.
That's crazy to me. The company's been talking about how it's kind of a cyclical demand, which also was confusing to me because I feel like, well, that's what I mean. Like right now, it seems like there is just demand.
So historically, memory chips are boom and bust. When there is great demand for consumer electronics, the memory chip companies ramp up capacity, and people tend to have stockpiles. Then when consumer electronics demand falls away because of an economic cycle or it's just not in vogue, sometimes those memory chip makers have been, oh no, now what do we do with all these big factories we've built and no one wants any memory chips? So they've tried to avoid that. Is the AI era different, where the data center demand for memory is sort of more linear and keeps going? And they would say, yes, it is.
A fascinating moment when he brought up the concept of memory as a service. So we think of memory as a commodity of these chips, and you teased a bit out of him in that regard. Later on, I was filling in for Ed on the show yesterday on Bloomberg Tech yesterday.
Thank you.
Talked to Professor. Thank you. You're welcome.
All right, you two. Do I need to be here for this?
At UCLA, who's really pioneered memory work. He said this is the next frontier. Explain what it is and sort of how that stands to change the way that we think about the compute that goes into AI.
Honestly, I don't know. He kind of did it of his own volition. But, you know, in the world of AI, when you think about AI workloads, so not training AI models, but running them, inference, you don't sort of necessarily as an everyday consumer or even a software company, any company that's using AI say, okay, I better go out and buy myself lots of chips to run this AI stuff. You rent cloud computing capacity from Amazon or Microsoft, Google, etc. And I think what he was basically saying is, instead of us selling the memory chips, kind of avoiding that boom and bust cycle, why don't we just rent out the memory capacity? Now, I think there's a lot of questions about how that would work in practice. And, you know, I tried to say to him, how would that work in practice? It's been really interesting because the Korean press has really picked this up and run with it. You know, it's an interesting idea, potentially higher margin. We don't know, but, you know, that is the direction that computing is going in, and that's exciting.
Yeah.
And we also have some sound from your interview because the chairman said he had big plans for the U.S. So.
Yes.
The SK already invested more than $35 billion in U.S. side. My plan is at a much bigger number. So
bigger than 35
billion. much bigger than 35.
So much bigger than 35 billion.
Much.
What is he teeing up?
Yeah, I right now, again, SK, they have 60% market share, basically, in high bandwidth memory, these data center memory chips we've been talking about. In Korea, they've committed hundreds of billions of US dollars to expand their domestic capacity, Here in the US, across SK Group, to date, 35 billion. So they raised $26.5 billion selling US listed shares. Kind of seems like nothing in the grand scheme of things. But this is where the customers are, right? NVIDIA is the biggest driver of HBM adoption. For every one NVIDIA GPU, there are 8 corresponding HBM chips. So if NVIDIA is going up like that, it's logical that so would SK. So they know that's a part of it. They need to have capacity here to serve the data center build out in the United States. He just didn't give me a dollar figure. Imagine if he had.
Yeah.
You know, we sent a red headline on the Bloomberg terminal with that because it's a very important political thing as well, right? This nation And this administration has been very proactive in getting outside capital to commit to building things here in America.
Got about a minute left. So you say that they have the largest share of high bandwidth memory production. There's Micron, there's Samsung as well. We had Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, talking about his desire for Samsung, SK Hynix, to do more here in the U.S. How resonant is that? And when you listen to him, you asked about politics explicitly, his relationship with the Trump administration. What's your read on kind of the resonance of calls like that from the Trump administration to do more here in the U.S. with a company like SK Hynix? Yeah,
and if you expand it beyond memory, TSMC as well. You know, the world is highly dependent on Taiwan for the production of the latest chips on the logic side, GPUs, compute. That is a security risk, many would say. So there's a great willingness to invest in America. The president been a good deal maker, but the debate that exists is, would they ever, Samsung, TSMC, bring their latest and greatest to America prior to bringing it to Korea or Taiwan? That seems unlikely. So you're waiting for the great American champion to crack the technology side. But that is the direction of travel.
Ed, we've only got about 30 seconds left before we have to send you on your way back home. What other stories should we be watching on your beat? What are you looking at coming up?
Earnings, technology company earnings, and all the American public needs to know this weekend is how much money did they spend on AI, and now how much money comes out the other side. Like, what's the net result of all of this spending? This quarter seems like that will be more in focus.
You know, Ed asked the chairman about the notion that there's an AI bubble, and he made an interesting distinction the chairman did, where there's kind of the way the stock market views it and the real world, and he, perhaps unsurprisingly, as the head of this conglomerate, thinks the real world is very different. There's still a huge need for all of this technical equipment.
That's very interesting. It's the opposite of what my fight with some of the markets with reality on the oil issue. But it is all about how people in that bubble are seeing it, what they're buying, what they're not. I also did ask him about this question that bubbled up about chip trade limits, import-export controls being lifted for UAE. Some concern that could lead to bigger data centers there, and he said, don't worry about it.
Not a big story. We'll see. Continue to track that. Our thanks to Ed Ludlow visiting us here in New York. Coming up, President Trump said he will allow Ukraine to manufacture Patriot missiles, and a possible sign he's changing his approach in the Russia-Ukraine war. Dig into that next, straight ahead on Bloomberg This Weekend.
Thank you for joining us live on Bloomberg This Weekend. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's update you on today's top stories. The governor of Missouri has declared a state of emergency. Now, this comes after widespread flooding and heavy rainfall across central and eastern parts of the state. Dozens of people were rescued, including several campers who took shelter on the roof of a building that had collapsed. A deadly wildfire in southern Spain, that has killed at least 12 people. That blaze started late Thursday in the Almeria province. It's one of Spain's deadliest wildfires. More than 20 people are still missing. A large and powerful typhoon moving toward China, bringing heavy rain and strong winds ahead of its expected landfall. Typhoon Bobby disrupted air travel in the region and triggered an emergency response in the Zhejiang province. Now it's the 9th typhoon of the year. Delta Airlines has reaffirmed its full-year profit guidance, citing strong demand for premium corporate and international travel. Now, the airline's revenue, it rose 14% from a year earlier, but its adjusted fuel expense, that was up 77% from the year-ago period. And that means, ticket prices, they will likely remain higher. On an analyst call, CEO Ed Bastian said it's not just fuel costs that are up.
The cost for labor is up, the cost for airports are up, the cost for technology is up. Planes you can't get, and if you can get them, their costs are higher.
To sports now. The PGA Tour continues with the Genesis Scottish Open at the Renaissance Club, topping the leaderboard. A three-way tie for first between Jordan Smith, Tom Kim, and Rory McIlroy at 9 under par. They're followed by Matt Fitzpatrick at 8 under par. In World Cup quarterfinals action, Spain defeated Belgium 2-1 in Los Angeles yesterday. Spain, they'll now advance to play France on Tuesday in Dallas. And that means there are now 2 semifinal spots left. That's taking place today. We have Norway battling England at Miami Stadium, and Argentina, they're taking on Switzerland at Kansas City Stadium. David and Christina.
Good matches both.
Yes.
Try to watch some of them. Lisa, thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you very much. All right. This week, President Trump said he would allow Ukraine to build its own Patriot interceptors. Both President Zelenskyy and the country at large are desperate for. But this will not be easy. As Bloomberg notes, a Patriot missile takes years to build, meaning Ukrainian production of these missiles will not materialize on the near-term timelines they need. Plus, Ukraine's ability to swiftly produce drones and missiles may not apply to Patriot production, given strict U.S. technology controls.
All right, here to help us break this all down is Axios' Future of Defense reporter, Colin Demarest. Colin, thank you for joining us. Patriots to Ukraine. The president says they're going to get them. It's not really as simple as that, right? Lockheed Martin holds a license, and as we just referenced, production, there's several tiers of these missiles. The top tier PAC-3 variant is $5 million each, and it's one of the most advanced air defense weapons in the world. How realistic is this?
Yeah, well, the announcement definitely caught me off guard when I was scrolling through Twitter and I saw the clip. I think this will be years in the making. This is not going to be like an overnight success by any means. If you look at Germany and Japan, those two guys are also assigned building privileges, and they have a ways to go as well, especially Germany.
I wonder if you could look at this in the context of the war that continues in the Middle East and sort of how the stockpile of these Patriot missiles has been depleted or impacted at the very least by what's been happening with Iran.
Yeah, I mean, the Pentagon will tell you the stockpiles are fine. Everything's Gucci. Don't worry about it. CSIS put out a study the other week saying it might take years to replenish some of these high-end interceptors that, Christina, you referenced.
We did speak earlier in the show and earlier this week with the Admiral CNO, Navy Admiral Caudle, about this exact issue. And he was saying, well, you know, the Navy hasn't had to fire as many of its munitions and it's doing okay. But I asked him about that timeline because there is a production gap. And if you've depleted about 40% of your stockpile and there's a 5-year gap, what do you do in that intervening time, especially looking at other regions, you know, likely to have a flare up in the Indo-Pacific or down in South America, again, depending on the president's objectives in the Caribbean. He said they are making strides to contract that time closer to 2 to 3 years, but that's still 2 to 3 years with a stockpile that wasn't where it was. Is this a national security concern? And is it something that they're able to tackle in that intervening time?
I mean, yeah, I think a lack of interceptors is a national security concern. I think you will also see Admiral Caudle, the CNO, push really hard on directed energy, maybe to fill the gap, or at least in the near future, get some laser or microwave weapons out there. He's very passionate about that. I think I've written 6 or 7 headlines all saying the same thing, that Admiral Caudle really wants lasers ASAP.
Yeah, we talked about that Trump-class battleship, and I said lasers, and he was like, yeah, lasers,
yes,
lasers.
That was
okay.
his training. He said at the postgraduate school. It was on lasers. Colin, I would just ask you sort of how this would play out in actual fact, so we know who has the ability to build these Patriots. As you tease that out in your head, like would a factory be built in Ukraine? Would it be built in a country nearby? Sort of, what have we learned about how this might happen in actual fact, were it to?
I think a lot of it's still up in the air. There's been talks about, obviously, in Europe, building out there. You also have to consider the fact that like these factories might get bombed by Russia or something, right? Like there's a huge issue here with contested logistics, distributing your supply chain, making sure your factory doesn't get targeted by a long-range strike. It certainly won't be near the front line, I would say.
You also wrote an article recently, we've been speaking in other segments about NATO and all of these systems working together and what that means for Ukraine. You talked about Ukraine-UK defense spending, saying more than 50,000 Ukrainian personnel have been trained on British soil as part of Operation Interflex. London has committed billions of pounds in security aid to Kyiv, plus a UK-Ukraine combo topped the Pentagon's first drone dominance challenge. Ukraine is showing we must rethink warfare. Cheap, mass-produced, precise is now dominant. We asked you last time you were here if thinking about these interceptors is the wrong way to do it, if the U.S. should be focusing more on Ukrainian-style drones and interceptors that way. Talk to us about that and how real this Ukrainian competitor system, Freya, is. What do we know about that system?
Freya also caught me off guard, if I'm being honest. I saw that on Zelensky's Twitter. That's definitely kind of a domestic ballistic missile defense conglomerate they're trying to build. The point about the UK-Ukraine combo, I think, is really interesting because in the UK's defense investment plan that just came out after a bit of delay, Ukraine's name dropped, I think, like 35 times over 81 pages. And that spans everything from space connectivity to missile interceptions and that sort of thing. So they're definitely taking to heart what's being learned over there. And I do think, obviously, these exquisite missile defenses, overhead defenses, can and should coexist with something cheap like that UK-Ukraine drone dominance combo we saw as the winner of the first competition.
Colin Demarest, setting the table for our next conversation with the Chairman Emeritus of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House. Colin, thank you very much. Great to talk to you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. All right now, President Volodymyr Zelensky's top priority in the war with Russia is obtaining those Patriot missiles, writing on social media, in part, Patriots are number one. We are grateful to the United States and to the Europeans who have helped us with these systems. But with Patriots, it's a matter of time. Production is very limited and the waiting lists are very long.
This week, the Ukrainian president went from the NATO summit in Turkey to meeting with several U.S. lawmakers, including Republican Michael McCaul of Texas, who joins us now live from Ukraine. He serves on the Foreign Affairs and Homeland Security Committees. I should say he was just recognized by the President of Ukraine with the Order of Merit, second class. Congratulations on that. Great to speak with you from Ukraine this morning.
Actually, it was the Medal of Freedom.
Medal of Freedom. Thank you very much.
Yeah. But no big deal.
No big deal. An accolade nonetheless. Pick up from what we were just talking about with Colin. There's this promise from the president that they're going to be able to build Patriot missiles. What did you hear from the president? What does that look like in real terms if Ukraine's able to do that?
Well, if I could put the threat landscape in picture for your audience, there are a lot of shellings where I'm sitting right now in Kyiv of ballistic missiles. I just came back from the front lines. It's heavy drone warfare on the front lines. They're actually winning on the front lines right now. They're actually capturing Russian territory, which is hugely significant. I think in President Trump's eyes, seeing them as a winner has been helpful in his discussions with Zelenskyy. But where they're vulnerable right now is they have no way to defend themselves. There's no air defenses with respect to ballistic missiles. I've been in some very intense briefings here. Russia is able to build well over 60 ballistic missiles a month. The ones that we were hit with last night were not intercepted. So they do not have interceptors. That's a Patriot battery, Patriot interceptor that they need. To arrange for the licensing agreements to be either sold or given to Ukraine is a major step forward, both politically as a showing of support, but also allowing Ukraine to use its amazing innovation I've seen over here with drone manufacturing to now manufacturing this Patriot interceptor. They have a very short window of time. In fact, I would say because the missiles are hitting now, normally it would be the winter time, but it's hitting now. They can move this a lot faster than, say, Lockheed can in the United States. I hope this can be done in short order.
Chairman, do you think Lockheed is going to play ball? I mean, they do have to agree to give Ukraine the license. And so far, our reporters and other reporters have not gotten an official comment from Lockheed as to whether or not they're going to be willing to do that.
Right. And it's a good question. I think it's in their best interest to do so for many factors. Their whole business model relies on defense contracts with the United States government, our military. If the president wants this done, it's in their best interest to comply with that. But in addition, Christina, I think we have a lot to learn from the Ukrainians. I've learned a lot on this trip in terms of the innovation and the drone technology. I think Ukrainians can build this thing faster and maybe even better. So Lockheed could learn something from the Ukrainians about their own interceptors, how to improve them, how to manufacture them more quickly. One of the biggest problems you heard from your previous guest is our defense industrial base and our inability to manufacture these faster in the current threat environment, not only here on the eastern flank of NATO, but also in the Indo-Pacific, and as we're seeing playing out in the Middle East.
Talk a bit, if you would, about kind of formalizing what you're mentioning here, which is kind of learning from what's happening in Ukraine. You've introduced this legislation, the Strategic Unmanned Systems Partnership Act, with the gentleman from Ohio, Marcy Kaptur. And I'm curious, do you see a lot of support within Congress to establish a more formal tie between these two countries when it comes to unmanned weapons in particular?
I do, because it's in our best interest. This is a laboratory that I'm in right now. And I've visited all the drone manufacturers here. There are some American companies here, a lot of Ukrainian, companies that are manufacturing the new innovation of technology, of modern advanced warfare systems. It'd be foolish not to be a full participant in the experiments going on in this laboratory where I'm sitting today. There are some European NATO countries here. I think we would be a loser to not be a participant. So what the bill essentially does within the National Defense Authorization Bill is to say, we need to cooperate with Ukraine and co-production of these advanced weapon systems in Ukraine and near the eastern flank of NATO. I did the same thing with AUKUS in Australia to call, there were Five Eye Nation, to defend against China in the Indo-Pacific. It's an exemption of what's called ITAR, the International Regulations on Weapons and Weapon Systems, using AI and quantum to build out advanced weapon systems. We have an amazing opportunity to work with the Ukrainians to advance our weapon systems in a faster, more innovative way. I think it's a wonderful idea that I think has broad-based bipartisan support.
Chairman, you mentioned that you have been traveling around and you've been on the front lines. So we actually have a pretty amazing photo that I think your colleagues sent over for us. It's very Top Gun. You've got the aviators and the flak jacket on. But this is serious stuff. And since you are there, how is morale? How are the Ukrainian soldiers feeling? Because they do have momentum. It does seem like these strikes in the interior of Russia are making a difference. We are seeing these lines at petrol stations. But Putin is an entrenched individual. I don't know if anything, even popular sentiment, is going to move him. Do they feel like they have traction? Do they feel like there's a sea change in this conflict? And where do we think this goes?
No, those are all great questions, Christina. Let me say, number one, morale is high on the Ukraine side of this war. I was on the front line in one of the most fiercest fighting areas, in the Donbass region. Morale is high because they're winning. And they were showing me the square miles that they've taken back from the Russian occupation. It's because of their innovation, with the drones. I think that coupled with the news coming from the NATO summit, I was literally with the Ukraine frontline soldiers when that news broke. That was a major morale boost for not only the fighting forces on the ground, but President Zelenskyy himself when I met with him, because it's showing a sign of support from the United States, from the president, and also showing a support on these Patriot interceptors that they so desperately need. So morale is high. I forgot the second part of your question, if you wouldn't mind repeating.
I did too. That's okay. I was wondering. We were thinking through this.
Sorry, I've been going kind of fast. I've been in these underground bunkers. Just to give you a taste of where I've been in these underground bunkers that are camouflaged, where I'm watching this drone activity on these video screens as we're seeing drones being hit out of the sky. These gas stations that we drove past within the last week have been blown up by Shahed drones. Really amazing. Last night, I was at their Central Special Forces Command, if you will, where their major drone operations are outside of Kyiv. And fascinating. This is the bottom line, the cost-benefit ratio. To take a drone that's worth about $25,000 and take out a $100 million infrastructure facility in Russia, this is how they win, because Russia can't afford it. And now I do remember your question. It has to do with Putin.
Yeah, it did come back to me as you were talking about the trenches, but go ahead, sir.
Putin is feeling the pain. He's getting more desperate, and that's why the ballistic missiles are coming in. He does see a vulnerability he's taking advantage of, but he's also feeling the pain. The average lifespan of a Russian soldier in the front line is a matter of hours to days. They don't last very long, and that's how effective the Ukrainians are right now. The morale of the Russian Federation soldier is way down. The population is feeling the pain now, not only with gasoline prices, but of the carnage taking place on their side of the front line. So I think Putin I know for a fact, was very angry at the outcome of the NATO summit meeting with the showing of support by the President Trump, to President Zelenskyy, and reinforcing that with, we understand you need better air defenses. We're going to help you with the Patriot interceptor. That was a very strong message to Moscow and to Putin. And I believe he's losing allies as well. Remember, Venezuela, Cuba, Iran are all under threat. And I think Putin is feeling backed against a wall. We don't want him to get too desperate and use tactics that would be unconventional. But I do think, who thought? Well, I was told 4 days this conflict would be over. And here we are 4 years later. And I'm proud to say, after the investment I was able to get with the emergency wartime supplemental bill, they are now winning.
I want to get a read from you of the president's engagement with this conflict. So you talked about him making that commitment of Patriots and what he said at the NATO summit. Of course, that was preceded by this 85-minute-long phone call that he had with President Putin. And I'm curious what you observed of him at the NATO summit in terms of engagement with the conflict in Ukraine, and indeed what the president of Ukraine said to you about the status of their relationship and his confidence in the support that he has from the U.S.
Well, remember, morale is already high because they're winning, but the message at the NATO summit is, I'm a winner. And President Trump likes winners. And President Trump now has decided to go, we'll see if it's all in, but he certainly was a strong showing of support for the president of Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. I think that was the right decision. I think the moral clarity is there. I think being on the right side of history is there. And the more pressure we can put on Putin, the closer we are to a peaceful negotiation. Remember, Zelenskyy is the one who has said, yes, I will agree to a ceasefire. The one who has not agreed to that is Putin. So you don't get him to the table by being nice to him. You get him to the table by putting leverage on him. Peace through strength works. And so the more strength we can show on the Ukraine side, and the more pain we can put on Russia and Putin, then the closer we are to a negotiated peaceful resolution of this conflict.
I do worry about a hubristic factor here, and to quote Mark Twain, the reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. There are some warning signs that, yes, Ukraine has momentum, but this isn't over, and Russia can come back very strongly. Are you worried that people are giving the win too early and that it will lose momentum or even lose interest with some of the allies? Or do you think that this really is a turning point in the conflict?
Yeah, I think the turning point started a year ago. They are winning on the drone war front. Where they're vulnerable are the air defenses for the ballistic missiles, and Putin knows that. That's why you're seeing the shelling taking place where I'm sitting today in Kyiv. Every night they're getting pounded here with ballistic missile attacks. They're trying to hit their energy infrastructure here. They have fired over a dozen hypersonic weapons into Ukraine. Those are the fastest velocity, most difficult missiles to stop. And the last piece that I worry the most about would be the tactical nukes. That would be a real act of desperation by Mr. Putin. I think his calculation, however, has guided him against launching those because he knows that that would galvanize the Western world against him. And he would also, has been warned by President Xi in China that his support from China could wane if he goes down that road.
Let me ask you lastly about the other big conflict, that, of course, what's unfolding in the Middle East. And the president in recent hours has said the ceasefire is over. He's willing to let talks continue, but it doesn't seem like he's fully engaged with them. Steve Witkoff can go do them. Jared Kushner can do them, but he's not evincing a kind of rigorous engagement at those talks as they're taking place. What's your sense of the White House strategy going forward here? Again, the clock is now ticking once again. The funeral for the late Supreme Leader has ended. How much optimism do you have that there'll be some resolution or progress toward a more permanent deal at the end of that 60-day period?
Well, I hope there is. I hope we can get the Straits of Hormuz open. Iran they're not stupid. I don't trust them. I don't think they negotiate in good faith. They know the midterm elections are coming up. They know that if energy prices escalate, that's going to hurt my party at the election ballot. I think, when you make a decision to go in like this, you got to go all in. And we had a historic opportunity to go in, and including regime change. When you do something like this, our military is the greatest, and they've achieved a lot of their objectives. The thing we weren't able to achieve was regime change. And we're still stuck with the same regime, essentially, without the Ayatollah. We're stuck with the IRGC. And they have also found power or weapon they can close the Straits of Hormuz. Going in, you needed leadership, weapons, and you needed communication, open communications. I am concerned about this. And the worst thing that could happen is we negotiate a really bad deal for political reasons before the midterm elections. Now that we're in and we seem to be all in, we need to do this correctly. But, I don't think the American people have a lot of patience, to be honest with you. And when they fill up their gas tanks, I filled mine up when I was home in Austin, and, it was $100. And so the American people are fatigued with wars in the Middle East as well. But it is very important that we succeed in this. I just don't have a lot of confidence in the negotiations, really. You have to have a real big stick to get a good negotiation.
Congressman, we're going to have to leave it there. Congressman Michael McCaul, the great state of Texas, please thank your team. And we know Leslie Shedd, friend of the show, is with you as well. Thank you guys for figuring out the logistics, and stay safe. And we'll see you back here soon.
And tomorrow, I should say, a fellow member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona, is going to be here to talk about those Patriot missiles as well as the latest from Iran. Join us for that tomorrow.
All right. Let's get back to our top stories. Good morning. I'm Lisa Mateo. Let's get right to it. And we'll start with some Apple news. Yeah, Apple is suing OpenAI for trade secret theft. Now, it accuses the AI startup of a coordinated campaign to steal information about upcoming products. OpenAI denies those claims. And in more company news, SK Hynix, well, they climbed 13% after a record $26.5 billion U.S. offering. Now, Bloomberg Tech's Ed Ludlow, he sat down with SK Group Chairman Che Taiwan, who said SK Hynix hopes to expand its ADR size once there's a good return.
First thing is that, we have to keep the stock price stable. And, hopefully in the long run, then, we can have that upside potentials.
The memory chip maker's American depository receipts finished their first session on Friday in New York at just over $168 each, below the $170 opening price, but still well above that $149 offering price. Now, according to its filings, SK Hynix, they intend to use the proceeds of the U.S. offering to build additional capacity and to buy extreme ultraviolet lithography machines as well on top of that. David and Christina.
Lisa, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Cuba has dealt with 2 nationwide blackouts in a week as the country grapples with an aging power grid, chronic fuel shortages, and the threats of further sanctions that have already hampered access to fuel and financing. Economists warn years of underinvestment have left the country more vulnerable and possibly unable to survive through this second Trump administration. In Bloomberg's Weekly Docs, Lucia He digs in.
What's coming next for Cuba? Capture and kill is still an option?
I just can't tell you that. We've got options all over the map.
Perhaps no other nation epitomizes Cold War politics more than Cuba.
When you look for a country that's, let's say, punched above its weight on a global stage, Cuba should be on the list.
Cuba and the United States, by default of their geography, have always had some kind of economic relationship. When we had prohibition in the United States, Cuba became a haven for American tourists.
Cuba is just 90 miles south of Florida. It's in the heart of the Caribbean. It's been seen as kind of a strategic platform for U.S. rivals.
The U.S. has had a broad trade embargo on Cuba since shortly after the revolution in the 1960s.
Cuba is ruled by a single party, the Cuban Communist Party, and it controls the legislature, controls the military, controls all facets of society.
Socialismo o muerte. But the socialist idealism that birthed Cuba has ground to a halt, literally running out of gas.
There is a dire jet fuel shortage in Cuba as the U.S. is moving to cut off the country's oil supply.
Crippling blackouts and a teetering economy have sparked unrest on the island.
We have an unprecedented degree of suffering on the island.
The Trump administration has taken a hard line.
Cuba has always posed a national security threat.
Tonight, the Justice Department unsealing an indictment against former Cuban President Raul Castro.
Will Castro actually face this prosecution?
The message the indictment sends to the Cuban government is that the U.S. is serious.
Amid the upheaval, many are looking for change, and some see opportunity.
Realmente me gustaría que Cuba pudiera realizarse.
2 million plus Cubans that live abroad. They have a genuine desire to see their country prosper and the people prosper and move forward into a different direction.
Bloomberg's Lucia He, and be sure to tune in tomorrow. We'll be speaking with Romina Ruiz-Goriana, USA Today Executive Editor of Investigations and Storytelling, on the heir apparent to take control of Cuba. And Christina, this is a story we continue to track on the show, of course, talking with folks on the ground there. Really just extraordinarily difficult to live your life.
It's really fascinating. Our colleagues in the New York Times, The Daily, did something where they followed someone through his day this week, and it was just impossible. I mean, there's not even, you have to get on the bus for the bikes, and there's no seats, and then you can't walk through the tunnels, and it just, every part of your day, there's no water in the morning, everything you do automatically, you can't.
Yes, credit where credit's due. An incredible piece from The Daily.
It was really
that
great
as well. It was good.
All right, coming up, our weekly session of embarrassment. It is pointed. Next with Lisa Mateo. Stand by. We'll be right back.
Well, as we near the 10 o'clock hour, it is time for my favorite part of the show. That, of course, is this weekend's Pointed News Quiz.
What's your favorite part when you win?
Yeah, I'm feeling good about it today.
Yeah, I'm feeling good about your chances,
feeling like
too.
my odds are good. Lisa Mateo.
Tied again last week, right?
Quizmaster. We did tie last week.
No, Lisa, well, normally I would say Lisa's on my side, but you two have had a weird pit bull connection that's kind of sustained us through this show today.
We did.
Now I'm concerned.
It was great.
Remember that, Lisa.
So now...
Don't remember that, Lisa.
Dale, that's what he said.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
No words.
Let's go to the questions. Okay, first of all,
for those of you playing at home, who are new to the show, the
what
game.
is Pointed? What are they talking about? This is a show. Okay, so it's a game. You can play it, of course, online. You can play it on the business app as well. So they each have 30 chips. Online, you don't have chips. You have multiple choice questions. But they have chips in front of them. So they're going to place their 30 chips and figure out how confident they are on these 3 categories that I'm going to tell you about. Okay? So think about it. Our first category is Italy.
Italy.
Second category is reptiles. And third category is beauty.
Beauty.
So how do you wager? How would you like to wager your bets?
I'm going to do the Ruffini split, but if you embarrass me on a question about Italy, we're going to have words in the parking lot after this. So
I'm going to put...
I know which parking garage you use. I will follow you.
All right. I'm going to put...
Wait, where are you doubling down
10 on Italy,
okay.
20 on reptiles, nothing on beauty.
You're going all in on reptiles?
Sure. Why not?
What is going on? Do you remember reading a single story about reptiles
Absolutely
this week?
not.
Okay.
But I do know a few.
Oh, I did remember one. Okay.
Listen, I've met a few snakes in my life, too. All right, Lisa.
Let's see how we are in Italy, okay?
Yikes.
Italy.
Italy.
Brazzale. I hope I said that right.
I hope so, too. That's for the spelling. It's like the spelling bee.
It was founded in the Asiago Plateau. Okay, they recently secured a loan of $11.4 million using what product as collateral?
Okay. Well.
So it's founded in the Asiago Plateau.
Yeah, we got it.
That was a very heavy-handed hint there.
Using what product as collateral?
Yeah.
Except my dyslexia, I'm flipping the letters. Okay, here we go.
Got this. Okay.
Yeah.
That was very quick.
I
Okay.
wrote cheese.
Cheese.
Asiago cheese.
Yes, very good. Very good.
Yay.
Yeah, they borrowed money against cheese still maturing in its warehouse.
I love an Asiago.
These like big wheels of Parmesan, they're like a commodity. You can do futures on them. You can trade on them. It's very interesting.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to keep my chips.
You guys are doing
All right,
well.
10 to 10.
We're off to a good
far away
start.
from David Gura.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Shall we go to reptiles?
I'm concerned about this. All right,
Okay.
reptiles.
I remember this story too. Okay, clinics were set up for bite victims after flooding in China caused a mass escape of which kind of reptile? This was in China.
How specific do we have to be?
What's the name of the what type of reptile? Name a reptile. Any reptile. If you can't think of one.
Okay.
I'm going to...
And flooding caused this. So it was
I
a
wrote
mass escape.
snakes, but then cobras in parentheses. But I actually didn't write that. I just wrote snakes. I just wrote snakes. I knew we could go broad. I was giving you more than I needed to.
Lizard.
Oh my gosh!
David,
I'm so glad Lisa had the foresight to clarify my answer.
Hand it over,
That seems
Ruffini.
unfair.
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
But hundreds of snakes actually escaped from
pictures. Do we don't have
breeding
pictures?
farms.
Do we have pictures?
No, we don't. But unfortunately, sorry, David, put me on the spot there.
Should I draw it? There's water.
So this,
there's
because I was
water
thinking,
and
you have
buildings,
this
and then
native
there's
there. I know there are like
snakes
lizards,
poking
but
out. They're like we were poking up out of the water like that, like in the water.
welcome to insanity.
Yeah.
It was very crazy.
So they were
Tried.
captive, and then they flooded, and
They were in
just-
breeding farms, and because the flooding happened, they all escaped, and that was the craziness of it. So hundreds of them, and people started getting bitten. It was
a
quite a
great
story.
Especially for covered floods.
It
The
was
worst thing
quite
about
a
covering
story.
floods is that water is so dark, and you can't
You don't
see
know.
into it, and you can't think about what is in that water. Ugh.
I'm
And
just
it was
stuck on breeding
snakes.
farms. There's an old country song called Snake Farms.
Is there?
Snake Farm. It's a reptile house.
I think you should come and play that for us. I've been asking
I don't
you
have the
for
rights to. I feel like I don't have the rights.
Thank you,
Great song.
David Gura.
Forget who sang that. Robert Earl Keen, maybe?
Do you
or
want to sing a little for us?
No,
He's good.
I'm good. I'm just so good because I'm winning with 30
Lisa?
chips
He
on
is.
the table.
Oh, I
But don't
forgot he
worry, don't
doubled
worry,
down
don't
on
worry.
that.
We still have a bonus, but we got to get through the third category
Yes, third
first.
category, sorry.
Okay. Beauty. This is where Christina's making up for it. CoverGirl is pivoting its marketing towards which generation that's expected to be the highest spending for years to come. So what generation are they now targeting after all this time? CoverGirl we're talking about. Okay? David thinks, yes?
Alpha.
Gen Alpha. No, Gen X. Hello. It's Gen X. Yes.
No sweat off my back.
Women
though.
in their 40s, 50s, early 60s. They think they're going to be
So
spending a
basically,
lot.
they're saying they're going to continue to market to us that we need to not age, and we will therefore be spending more and more on beauty products.
If you want to take it that
Well,
way.
things are getting heavy. This is a weekend show. Let's keep it light, please.
Oh, how many do you
Keep
have
it
over there?
light.
Oh, Christina.
Lisa, I feel very betrayed. You've let the sisterhood
it's okay.
down
It's
today.
okay. I have your chips. Okay, let's go to the bonus because if you get the bonus, I'll give you these 20 back.
I don't think so.
Okay. Here's the bonus. Oh, you're gonna love this. Sports.
Sports.
All right,
Love
can I
it.
be excused?
We love it.
Australia is financing a sports team in Papua New Guinea to
Okay.
combat Chinese influence. What
Interesting.
sport will they
might
play?
know
So what
this.
sport are they going to play? Australia and New Guinea to combat Chinese
I
influence.
wrote rugby.
You wrote rugby.
I wrote handball.
You rugby is correct.
This is the best day.
This is the
I'm
best game
so
ever.
excited. Can I just have her 20 chips? Add to it.
This is the first.
Cash them
Give
in.
it
Dealer's
to her,
choice.
though.
What a day.
She has
They're-
never ended with zero
That's
chips.
so
No, this is the
cute.
worst
Oh my
performance
God.
I have ever
bad
done.
Just get the
ever.
jib to zoom in on that stack of 30 before me. Lisa, thank you very much. Pointed, always the highlight for me of our show. Oh my God, you'll have to clean
Chips
those up.
all over.
If you
Bloomberg.com/pointed.
want to test your knowledge and see if you could do better than me, which is not a high bar this week, all 10 questions are on the Pointed News Quiz at Bloomberg.com/pointed and the Bloomberg Business app.
Thank you very much for joining us, for watching my victory unfold in real time. We'll be back here tomorrow, 7 o'clock Eastern Time. I'm David Gura.
I may be back here tomorrow. I'm Christina Ruffini, along with Lisa Mateo. For our listeners on Bloomberg Radio, Masters in Business is up next on TV. Wall Street Week with David Weston starts right now.